Fathers of Reddit, what is the worst boyfriend your daughters have brought home? Who made you say, that guy? Really, who did you just not like and why? My beautiful, brilliant, scholarship-winning daughter fell in love with a homeless addict in Portland, or, about 10 years her senior year. Not too much later, my daughter was also a homeless drug addict in Portland and he was in jail. We're now 5 months into rehab sobriety but she still pines for this piece of crap. WTF did I do wrong? I don't know if this fits the question because she never brought him to my home. My daughter brought home a gay guy. I just gave him a knowing, non-judgmental nod. I knew it would work itself out, and it did. I still occasionally tease her about it for not realizing. My daughter, age 16 at the time, I think, once brought home a trailer park hero. Blank, glassy eyes, a dead fish handshake, and a mouth that just hung open all the time, aka catching flies. He never wanted to go anywhere or do anything, just wanted her to come to his trailer house, obviously to fool around. I attempted to be polite and speak to the young man, but he could only vaguely nod and answer in monosyllables, and excused himself to leave quickly. The moment he did, I simply looked at her and asked, really? Fortunately, it only lasted another couple of days after that. That man wasn't their hero, just their ambassador. My daughter had dated a string of some real good kids who had good heads on their shoulders, good prospects for success in life, but dumped each one as just not what she was looking for. She then went through what her two older brothers like to call the bum of the month club. Each one she brought home to meet me even worse than the last. I was at the point of telling her that she needed to reassess her standards upwards a tad before she really found a true loser who would end up hurting her. She found him. It was bad. She came around. In the end it was his butt getting hurt. However, he thought he was a tough guy and tried to physically harm my daughter after she tried to tell him it was over, which was a huge mistake on his part. This kid was 6 feet 1 inches and 185, wore wiffle beaters, backwards hat and droopy drawers and thought he was a tough guy. White suburban punk. You've seen them. My daughter was a 4-sport athlete her entire school career and had her college education covered by an athletic scholarship. When he showed up at a party she was at even with the restraining order against him and grabbed her arm and wouldn't let go. She hit him so hard flush on the side of the jaw that it tore his left earlobe off of his head, chipped 3 teeth while putting a hole through his cheek in the process, and knocked him clean out with one punch. It was a good thing there were witnesses as she was arrested for aggravated assault when they had to call the squad to take the kid to the ER to patch his butt back together. The charges were dropped. Soon after I got home early that Sunday morning, her brother pulled into the drive after picking my daughter up at the local PD. Her white blouse was brown with the splotchy stains of dried blood. The first thing she said to me was, "Don't worry, Dad, none of it's mine. My little girl, mercenary-hearted little blue-eyed blonde. By all the gods, you've not raised a daughter so much as a shield maiden." I have to say the 15-year-old boy that climbed in my 15-year-old daughter's window the past Saturday night is not high on my list of favorites. I'm the daughter who brought home the losers. When I was 16 I met this cute guy in school and we'd only hung out a few times. We liked each other but didn't really know each other that well. But I brought him home to meet my parents anyway and it immediately went downhill. My parents tried to make small talk with him and one of the first things he told them was that he was bipolar and schizophrenic, had severe ADHD, and once stabbed a pencil through his hand on a dare, but it didn't hurt haha, and kept referring to his mom as that B, and just a bunch of other bizarre stuff you don't tell the parents of the girl you like. He had never told me any of that stuff before nor did he act strange either so I was blindsided. My dad, who has never had much of a filter, said okay pal this isn't happening. You can go on ahead and leave the same way you came in. I was mortified but secretly relieved my dad asked him to leave. The only other interaction I had with that kid was 4 or 5 months later when he started dating some other girl and we were sitting in class one day and he leaned over and asked me can a girl get pregnant from giving a BJ? Facepum. In high school I had a boyfriend who everyone in my family, mom, dad, brothers, used to make jokes about because he was so obviously gay. I ignored it and dated him for about a year. He's a woman now. My sister dated a guy for a few years in high school, but then one day he told her he was gay, and she was like, oh hey, me too. Then they formed a band and they've been best friends ever since. I'm Hispanic and used to have a temper as a teen. Met a girl who seemed to like me but always tried encouraging me to do stupid crap. Let's race those guys. Woman, no. I love this car. I ain't risking it. For some reason she wanted me to meet her cop dad. So I did. We hit it off over a mutual love of motorcycles and Rush music. And he invited me to a BBQ. The girl hated that her dad loved me. Apparently she wanted him to hate me. She dumped me the next day. I really wanted that BBQ. He knew. He torpedoed the whole thing by getting along with you. Clever bastard. I was the black guy most of the white girls in my high school dated. I was on the debate team and an athlete. Also did track. All the fathers were suspicious of me because I didn't like basketball. Who needs basketball when you got the booty call? Daughter here. My dad is a drug cop and I brought a boy home. My dad pulled me aside and said, you're too old for me to tell you what to do. But I interrogated that boy a few months ago and all he did was play the air guitar the whole time. I continued to date him for a few months, then it ended. He rocked that air guitar though. One kid she brought home ended up being a stalker, then ended up sneaking into our home at 4 AM after they had broke up. He and I had a short, severely unpleasant little chat. Threats of severe injury may have been discussed. He never showed his face again. Daughter and I were both happy with the outcome. My sister's boyfriends have been consistently pretty stand-up guys post high school, but she exclusively dated women for about 10 years and brought home some real winners. Angie, the reformed cook with a rap sheet a mile long, asked me to buy her Sudafed when she had a cold, because she couldn't. Real grade A girlfriend material. First person I'd call if I was in fear of getting my boss beat by a gang of truckers though. She was the largest and scariest man to ever be born with a uterus. Martha, the former cult member. Her parents' fault. Not hers, she was like 5 when they joined but she was a little loopy from it, and reformed CKed. My sister married her during one of the brief periods when gay marriage was legal in CA and we all flew out to attend. Great wedding and reception. Divorced a year later. You know the joke about a guy being so bad in bed he turns women gay? Martha was so bad at being a spouse she sent my sister running back to the ranks of the hetero-leaning bisexuals. Her current boyfriend is super nice, easy to get along with, and a really good dad. He also used to work at a brewery and is very beer knowledgeable, which is awesome. Bonus. I will probably never have to come over to my sister's house armed to tell him to leave, since it's exceedingly unlikely he'll go on a crack binge and start pounding on her door at 2 AM. I appreciate that about him. It's exceedingly unlikely he'll go on a crack binge and start pounding on her door at 2 AM. It's the little things. I brought home the moron. He was a pothead who chain smoked. Whenever my dad or mom would check up on us, as parents do, he would yell at them to give us our privacy. He started talking about having kids with me and told my mom that he had been poking holes in rubbers. She went redneck on him right then and there. To this day, my family calls any stupid behavior pulling a insert X's name here. He would yell at them to give us our privacy. Ha, that would have gotten your door kicked in at my house. I had to be. I was skinny, fragile, with blue hair, drug problems and a huge beef with all families. So glad I'm not that person anymore. I brought him home. He was a manipulative, elitist sociopath and I was the only one who didn't see it. My entire family despised him because he treated me so badly. When he dumped me, the phrase he so eloquently used was, "I'm like a Led Zeppelin song. I just need to ramble on." All my mother said to me was, "He just did the best thing you could have ever done for you." She was right. I'm like a Led Zeppelin song. I just need to ramble on. Lolwood. I'm not a father, but I have a good story about this. My sister dated a guy through most of high school. He was nice enough, headed to the military, and eventually my sister decided to split with after a year or two in college. He was obsessed with my sister and they had a big fight, but she stuck to her guns and said they were done. In the middle of the night, he drove drunk over to our house, pulled his truck up next to the garage, climbed up his truck onto the roof of the garage, pulling off the gutter in the process, carefully climbed his way to my sister's window and knocked. It terrified her. She ran over to my mother's room. My dad was working at the hospital overnight, and my mom answered the window. He was in serious trouble. My mom gently told him to get down from the roof, took his keys and made his friend come drive him home. I've never seen my dad that angry, but he never got to say anything to the guy, because my dad wasn't a confrontational person. If he were there though when the guy climbed the roof and scared my sister, I'm fairly sure he would have murdered him. Answer the window. I was that girl who brought the bad boyfriend home. He was a German exchange student and I was at an age where all that mattered was the sexy accent. My stepdad, who worked for the government, did a background check on him because he felt like something was off. I feel like he did background checks on all my boyfriends, but that's a different story. We find out his student visa expired last year and he's in the country illegally. He reports him to his superior. My stepdad gets my boyfriend deported. End of relationship. I feel like he did background checks on all my boyfriends, but that's a different story. Can confirm. My girlfriend's stepfather is a retired cop. He runs background checks on pretty much everyone. His wife prior to dating her, all of my GF sexes, and me, I imagine. Her sister's SOS. Not a dad, but another girl here who was that girl who brought the bad guy home. I started dating this guy who was fresh out of juvie for getting plastered and driving a truck into our house. It was clear that he was a rampant dickwad, but for whatever reason I was smitten. My parents knew something was off right away. I hadn't told them the juvie part. They said they just felt something was wrong and said I needed to forward that relationship, but I didn't. The whole relationship was interesting to say the least. He totaled my car, tried to kidnap me, left me alone at his house to go cheat on me among many other things. We broke up after 2 months, and last I heard he was in prison for stealing a truck and shotgun, and is now married to some random chick he met through some prison lover finder service. TLDR. Listen to your parents, kids. I was the boyfriend. Before I met her parents they saw one of our AIM chats and completely misinterpreted some things, which was pretty awkward. Her mother was nice but I don't think I had a chance at being accepted by her dad regardless. I was the boyfriend. I started out being loved by both of the parents. I was well dressed and respectful of them. Me and her father both have RC helicopters and airplanes so we bonded over that. I would regularly spend the night at their house, in the basement, when we were on break from school so I wouldn't have to drive home late at night. Then one morning we woke up and no one was home. We were planning on going to Chicago for the day. We had sex and then sat in the living room to eat breakfast. I had the used rubbers in a bag on the floor to take with us and throw away at the train station, but we forgot them there. Halfway through the trip she got a call from her mother saying she found the condoms. Her father never knew. Thank God, but I never spent the night again. My mother found my condoms and freaked out. I quietly said okay, I won't use them next time. She was suddenly not bothered at all about my possession of condoms. I'm a daughter who brought home an idiot. He was terrified of my parents because he was an atheist and my parents are Christian. Before he even met them, he'd get drunk and ramble about giving them the what for if they tried to convert him. Yes, I pick winners. My dad is a gentle bear of a man and my mum is a little lady. They're an older couple and the nicest people I've ever met. He projectile vomited in the restaurant bathroom before he sat down to eat with everyone for their first meeting. When I moved in with him, he insisted on getting a buzz on before they would visit. When I got really sick, I asked him to take me to the clinic. He declined in favor of band practice. My dad ended up driving down to make sure I was okay and even cook me breakfast. When he dumped me, because yes, I was too stupid to do it myself, I called my dad crying my head off. He listened to me rant for a few minutes and then said quietly, "At least you didn't get pregnant. I will always be grateful for that." At least you didn't get pregnant. I will always be grateful for that. Dad speak for I'm glad I won't have to deal with that idiot till I die. Not a father but I brought home one my entire family hated, specifically my father. He was a long-haired, skateboarding hippie with a terrible mustache, typical 17-year-old teen. My father hated everything about him. He was too polite for how he looked. His hair was too long. His pants had holes in them. The works. But mustache hippie didn't give up easily and slowly won them over one by one. My brother was easy, sisters not so much, and my father eventually came to love him. Now he works for their family business and is set to take it over with my brother when they retire. I guess the point of this ramble is to not judge your daughter's boyfriends too harshly too fast. Sometimes teenagers just look dumb as heck. They'll grow out of it. You're not fooling anyone. Skateboarding hippie. I was the boyfriend. I apparently gave her parents the serial killer vibe. Their words: I'm just shy, anxious, and introverted. Anyone else get a solid ego boost from reading these threads? It's always nice to be reminded that there's someone worse out there. He was a black gangsta style teen who couldn't stop staring at my daughter's butt, would grab at it when she got off the couch, in front of our whole family, and would regularly adjust his package through his basketball shorts as he walked behind my daughter. I don't think I'd be able to sit through that. My stepdad rarely liked any of my boyfriends. He tells me now it's because he was never prepared for me to grow up and him have to deal with it. But one guy definitely takes the cake. He was getting kicked out of his house he was living in. We'd been hanging out, not even dating, for a week, and I really ended up not being that interested because he was terrible and obsessive. Well, he goes up to my stepdad while I'm upstairs and tells him he should really let him live there because he was nowhere else to go. My stepdad laughs and tells him no way. The guy runs out of our house, slams our front door and starts walking down the road. My stepdad for sure chased him down and informed him if he ever thought to slam his door in his house ever again he'd be a dead man walking. Thankfully that got rid of Mr. I'm a drifter. Come to think of it, I can't think of a single boyfriend he's liked off the bat. Haha, fairly impressive balls on that guy. Still a bag though, lol. I've brought home that guy before. He was a 35-year-old unemployed pothead hippie that didn't shower or wash his clothes so much. When I asked my mom what she thought about him, she just shook her head and told me he smelled bad. Daughter here. My dad is a retired US Army major and I once brought home a guy who closely resembled a gorilla. Don't ask me. I was 16 and I was in love. My father took this poor primate into his office, interrogated him for about an hour before our date. We say goodbye and as we're leaving out the front door to finally go, my dad hands my BF a banana and tells him to eat it if he gets cranky on our date. BF shrugs and doesn't get it. My dad chuckles and I give Poppy Ole death stare. My father continued to hand this kid a banana every time we went out together. The kid never got the joke and I never told him. Eventually, I just got too embarrassed to even bring the kid around anymore. My dad still brings it up, and that kid still looks like he got the lead roll in Tarzan, the musical. Depending on the skin color of your boyfriend, your dad may or may not be super racist. My wife apparently dated a lot of dumbasses before we started dating. She could tell they liked me as I was the only one her father didn't offer to show his gelding knife to. Most of the idiots didn't even get it. My sister brought the local bad boy home when she was about 16. In our house, he told me and my mother to frick right off for no particular reason. Sat on the couch and light up a cigarette. My sister thought it was funny and my mother told him he had to leave immediately. My sister screamed at my mother that this is my house too and he can stay. I told my sister that either he leaves or I make him leave. He jumps up and gets right in my face saying make me. Mother. My sister says fine. We'll leave. Losers. Yep, she was awesome when she was a teenager. Fast forward a few months and she dumped him because he was a total idiot. Fast forward a few months later and he was stalking her wherever she went. Fast forward a couple years and he followed her to Greece. We live in Canada. Showing up at the apartment she was renting with friends. He had a nice chat with some Greek police and exited her life forever. I was never the loser boyfriend. At least I don't think I was considered that. I typically got along well with any GF father I met. But I met a shithead father. I was in college on my way to being a mechanical engineer. It was Christmas Eve, and I showed up with a bottle of wine for her parents and gifts for her two younger brothers. My GF already had her gift. That night, her stepfather asked me to help him move a present from the garage. Once we were alone, he backed me into a wall and gave me the "if you hit her, I'll kill you" speech. Years later, it became apparent that the only one that hits women regularly in the family was him hitting her mom. I'm glad she's not too fond of them anymore, and we rarely see her side of the family. My 22-year-old best friend is dating a homeless 17-year-old who lives at the mission. The only reason he is homeless is because he got kicked out of his parents' home for doing C in front of his 6-year-old niece. He is rude, deceitful, manipulative, and insults me at every chance he can get. Refers to me as the fat one. Can't freaking stand that guy. Have no idea why she is with him. Oh, and my friend won't tell me where she met this piece of work. She's doing coke. I was the boyfriend. Her parents thought I was a drug dealing, boozing, do nothing loser, their words, and that I only wanted to get into her pants. I mean, sure, I like to party, but I wasn't a drug dealer and we were still in high school, which I ended up graduating from. We dated for almost 3 years, and I never changed their opinion of me. I guess part of it was that they figured I was trying to hide something because I was so friendly. I wasn't hiding anything. I just wanted to be nice to my girlfriend's parents. With that said, we did argue constantly during the last 8 months or so. High school relationships, am I right? Rough man rough. Not a father, but the older sibling that was away in college when my parents met my jailbait sister's 18-year-old boyfriend. He had been sneaking in and out through her window for months before they even knew about him. They found out sis had been physical with him and my dad threatened to have him put on a sex offender registry if he ever came near her again. They no longer date. I was the daughter. I had a few BFs that I dated before I met the one I am still dating today, and it wasn't an easy road. My parents were very strict on me dating a Polish guy. Well, all the Polish guys that lived around me had their heads up their butt, and so I started dating my half Mexican half Spanish BF. They hated him, yelled at me in front of him that they want a Polish guy, etc. Eventually, after seeing him a few times a week, they got used to him. Both hardly speak English, so obviously they can talk to him, but they just stopped complaining about him. Nowadays my dad uses him as his personal helper of house projects and construction work, which my BF doesn't complain about because hey, at least he's civil to him. My mother tries to feed him every time she sees him because he is really skinny, but she's also civil. We have been dating for 5 years now, and I guess the best advice I could give to anyone in my situation is to just give it time. Eventually, if the parents see that race is the only issue but he's friendly and committed to his aspirations, they stop looking at his race. That feel when racist family. Not a father, but I'm the daughter. I had one boyfriend a few years ago that I recently found out my dad hated. Apparently it was because he was too comfortable around my dad, and he didn't like it. My dad is a really quiet guy, not very intimidating in my opinion, but I guess he likes feeling that way. Ex's grandmother told her in front of me to watch out because I might get the ex preggo and run off with the kids to India. I laughed and replied that my grandma warned me, watch out, the little blonde white girl will just divorce you and take all your money. Well, my sister's current prospect has made conversations of how crappy her purse was. What kind of dude notices that crap? Insisted on knowing her shampoo brand on the first date. Is closer to our mother's age than hers. Lives in a tiny butt apartment but still thinks we're some poor slobs. My bedroom is the size of his house, and it isn't covered in pizza grease, and a bunch of other stuff I won't even mention. The last one was a drug smuggler. Before him was the man-child who just played old NES emulators and COD all day night. Before him was the 7 feet 3 inches giant who gave her a puppy on their third date. Pretty good guy otherwise, just that was kinda weird. I am that guy. My wife's parents don't like me at all, but to be fair, I don't want my wife or son spending any time around a crazy bus nut job who tried to rape my sister-in-law, forced my wife's mother to quit her job to stay home and raise 4 kids, while not having a stable job himself, and whom my wife has nightmares about regularly. Just call me old-fashioned, I guess. Any boy that looks like he is only dating my daughter to have sex with her, and worse, that looks like he'd have sex with anybody that is not my daughter as well. Basically, if he looks like me or my friends when we were younger, it's a bad sign. Nerdy, reserved, polite, respectful, great, but boys like that evidently don't get too many chicks, so I'll probably never see one of them. I was cheated on by 2 different nerdy, reserved, polite, and outwardly respectful guys in high school. Douchebaggery knows no limits. My sister has brought home all kind of whackers over the course of years. It must be exceptionally hard for my father to be tolerant, but poor guy never spoke. Okay, he did occasionally make fun of them, and this poor dude was bowled all over and he called him chemo, which is very cruel. But anyways, my sister is no longer 16. So bringing home doucher bags is no longer okay. She is in her 30s and she has been dating for so long this guy who I liked at first, but he turned out to be manipulating and abusive. He'll literally get angry at her in front of the whole family, and you'll witness the following scenario. No. Let me see. Let me see. He violently grabs her phone to check out who texted her. He kept telling the whole family how much he loves her and how bad she treated him, and I was on his side because my sister can be a total C. But he has crossed the line a long time ago. And I am worried that if things ever get serious he'll become abusive in more ways than one. And my sister is 31. She really is in marriage age now. And they've been fighting all the time when there really is no reason to fight. So I can't imagine what would happen if they actually had a reason to fight. We are no longer in good terms. I was on his side. I was willing to forgive a lot. But he has really done lots of stupid crap, and once he trashed her publicly on Facebook. It was really my duty as a brother to tell him to go frick himself. I know it's not my place. I know my sister chose him. I know I don't know the whole story, but at some point a brother needs to step in. We are no longer in good terms. He does not get along with my mother anymore, and my sister did not bring him home for several months. Now he started coming again. Notably, one time he told my mother, "Mrs. Rubberdong, I want you to know that I love your daughter, but she is a S and she has fricked everyone." How the frick is a person supposed to respond to this? This whole situation sounds like it sucks, but it's tough for me to stop chuckling over Mrs. Rubberdong. The crazy mental image I get when reading it in my head and trying to picture the person with this name. I've been on the internet too long. What did your parents' family do that you later realized was insane? When my mother left my dad, she pitched a tent in my walk-in closet. I was 7 or 8 and she lived in my freaking closet for months before she got her own place. I still remember her reading her Joyce Meyer books by lamplight. That's actually kinda sad. They kept everything. Everything. The moment I walked into my friend's house and realized you're not supposed to have stuff lining the walls was ridiculous. My mom once blew out the pilot lights on our gas stove, cranked up the gas, and told 7yo me and my 14yo sister to go to sleep. I went to bed, not knowing any better. Luckily, my sister dragged me out of the house and we sat in the car. Mom finally changed her mind, sobered up a bit, aired out the house, relit the pilots, and took us back inside. That was fun. Holy crap. My mom was always very invested in our romantic lives, partly because that was an area where we didn't stack up well as compared to our cousins. The most insane manifestation of this was when I agreed to go out on a date with a guy, only to find out before the date that he was a sexual predator who'd been arrested after he preyed on 4 separate freshmen at the school where he taught. Mum flipped out trying to convince me not to cancel the date. He might have grown out of it. You don't know if you don't give him a chance. Thankfully, my dad was on my side and I cancelled the date. But mom sulked the entire rest of the night and demanded I log her into my Facebook account so she could scroll through my friends list so that she could see which of my male friends were straight and single so that she could push me towards them. Instead. Your mother is scary. Let homeless punk rockers live with us. Several. And some of them slept in our beds with us. With her permission. Two of my sisters were teen moms. Well, that took a turn. My grandpa would pick up my mom and aunt from elementary school and race the train every time. My mom scared shitless and my aunt cheering him on to go faster. My dad would do that down the Pacific coast in his truck. I was always so amped and would yell at the train. No restrictions on food or drinks. From the time I was 4 or 5 I was drinking around 5 cans of Dr. Pepper a day. My parents never told me I needed to drink water and real juice was never in the house. Juice when I was little was Hawaiian Punch or the 5% juice Minute Maid fruit punch. Lunches during the summer was a continuous cycle of pizza rolls, SpaghettiOs and McDonald's. Breakfast was either chocolate Pop-Tarts or Fruity Pebbles cereal. I don't think junk food now and then is too much, but I don't think I had a single day in my childhood where I wasn't given sweets. fatty snacks and caffeine. The funny thing is, as a kid I used to think it was my friends' parents who were the odd, mean ones for only letting their kids have things like sodas on rare occasions. Looking back, I speculate that along with just being lazy parenting, it was also probably my parents' way of trying to make me happy and make up for the lack of time spent with me by buying me whatever junk food I wanted. My brother, while raising his boys, would buy like 10 gallons of milk at a time when it was on sale and then put it in the deep freezer. It never tasted like milk after it thawed. He claimed to not have noticed a difference. Oh, there's a difference, all right. It's because the fat protein of the milk is separated when frozen, since only the water really freezes. It's a really crap explanation, but basically it's kinda like how butter's made. The frozen milk would have a bit of yellow to it and taste a bit like it too. Fun fact, frozen breast milk begins to develop a chalky taste after being frozen because of lipase. My parents visited underground Atlanta back in the early 90s. Not the safest place. Anyways, my brother was a baby and crawled under a bench they were sitting on. He pulled out an umbrella bag with a very sinister knife inside. My parents don't report the knife or anything, but instead keep it, and it becomes a staple knife in our kitchen. So yay. Pretty sure my parents used a murder weapon to cut the crust off our PB&Js. I go to Georgia State, and I'm right by this area every single day, lol. This story is so absurd, but I can imagine this scenario completely. My dad fell victim to many money scams in the early 2000s. He would always say he's sitting on a gold mine, and I thought we were gonna be rich. Yeah, I don't think he's learned his lesson. I still catch him replying to Bull's emails. There's a cool movie, Nebraska, about an aging dad and his son where they go on a road trip to collect money from one of those you've won mailer things. Nothing really gets resolved, but it's a great view of the adult-child failing parent dynamic. Imo, your story made me think of it. Gonna go watch it again tonight while having a drink and remembering the rents, the good and the bad. My godbrother's parents used to lock us in his room for hours to days at a time. His little brothers learned to pee in the trash can instead of in the floor when we couldn't get them out. We eventually learned how to unlock and relock the hatch from inside the room so that the four of us could get out for pee breaks and for snacks when we were feeling really ballsy. I didn't realize how abnormal this was until I was watching a news story in the work break room with a bunch of co-workers about a neglected child being removed from an unfit home. My initial response was that's nothing, as I launched into what I just wrote above. I looked around waiting for everyone else's stories, but instead they all just stared at me. I have a brother with disabilities. He's relatively low functioning and requires regular attention, both inside the home and out. I love him to death, but it made for a pretty untraditional childhood. I didn't realize until my late teenage years that other families were happy and relaxed. Which isn't to say that they didn't have their problems, just that they weren't constantly preoccupied by one family member who requires more care and attention than others at all times. To be clear, my brother is a wonderful person. I cherish every moment that I get to spend with him now, but at the same time, I spent a disproportionate amount of my childhood in waiting rooms while he went to various therapies, and I spent very little time with my parents growing up, because all of their attention was focused on my brother. I was an afterthought, because I was lucky enough to be an afterthought and still function. My alcoholic bipolar father would drop me and my two siblings off at the grocery store with his credit card and told us to go grocery shopping. We were young kids when this started. He'd either go hit up a bar or wait in the parking lot before coming back to get us. Sometimes it would be a long wait. Looking back, I still don't know how we were able to run his credit card and no one ever batted an eye. We had to cook too, so it wasn't exactly healthy stuff. A lot of times the food would all be gone a week or so before he'd take us back to the store. We had to get really creative. We'd joke that there was nothing left but the goo in the back of the refrigerator. Honestly surprised we didn't develop diabetes, although I am hypoglycemic, or obesity or anything serious. We quickly learned not to buy a bunch of candy or sweets, something that kind of impresses me looking back. I learned to keep an emergency stash of food hidden in my room. One of many insane things, but first that came to mind. His credit score was either amazing or awful. My dad once took 3 of us kids out for a ride in the Pine Barrens. He drove us 20 minutes into the woods on a sandy trail in a minivan. He had just gotten into a fight with my stepmother and needed a drive to burn off all the alcohol in his system. He didn't say much during the ride. We got stuck, obviously because we were in a 2WD caravan, but luckily some 4WD truck dude came through and winched us out. When that guy showed up, Dad wasn't quiet anymore and we left the woods when we were unstuck and went home. I'm not sure what his intentions were that day, but the look on my stepmother's face when we returned made me rethink whether it was a fun ride in the woods or a frick this life moment worthy of the nightly news narrowly averted. My mom is very controlling. She would make me turn my diary over to make sure I wasn't writing anything she didn't approve of. So I saved up enough money by skipping school lunch and bought a secret diary at the book fair. I came home to her sitting on my bed and yelled at me for writing "Mom is a jerk" or something like that. She would have grounded me, but I wasn't allowed out of the house without her escorting me until age 16. She then wondered why I had no friends. I was allowed only 30 minutes on the computer in the computer room and I would have to record which websites I went on and what usernames and passwords I used. She would use the password book to go on the websites and look at who I was talking to. I also just kind of accepted that it was normal for parents to charge rent when you turned 18 and only allow you to eat one meal a day, dinner, and have to pay for the others yourself. Get into a screaming argument where they ended up throwing dishes at each other's heads fairly frequently. Wow, they're really mad right now. Better play some Nintendo until this blows over. I would hide in my closet with my Game Boy and book light. It wasn't until way later in life that my sister and I said, wait a second. WTF. When we were young, my father smoked a lot, and when we were with him during the day and said we were hungry, he'd give us each a pack of matches. We'd eat them and then be good. No, we weren't poor, just had lazy crazy parents. I used to babysit my parents' friends' kids occasionally. After I babysit 2 kids that were 4 and 6, my mom said her friend was happy and I did a good job. I was 13. Then she mentioned that was good because her friend was distrustful of babysitters since her other 2 kids had drowned while under a babysitter supervision. Thought that was slightly odd. No helicoptering in the 80s. Dang. That's Olympic level not dwelling on things. Fend for yourself night. When I was like 5 and on, we'd have to find our own food that night. I later found out my parents were too lazy to cook for my sister and I, who were just 5 and 8. I used to come up with really weird food combinations, most notably Nutella or peanut butter and candy sprinkles wrapped up in a tortilla. As I got older I began toasting it and rolling it in cinnamon sugar. That was pretty normal in my house, but mostly because our schedules were so wildly different and we all got hungry at different times. Though eventually I got tired of it and started forcing us to eat at a more standard time because I was sick of having pizza rolls or Hot Pockets for dinner. My mother refused to take me to the emergency room growing up. She took my stepdad and my stepsister, but refused to take me. Have permanent damage to my ankle thanks to her refusing to take me there. Thanks mum. I live in UK for reference, so it wasn't like we couldn't afford it. My mom was the same. She was working 6 days a week and didn't have time for any illness. I had a severe pneumonia and she made me go to school anyway. Throughout my childhood I would end up being my dad's therapist. He'd often tell me he sometimes wished he would go to sleep and never wake up. A bit heavy for a 12-year-old to hear from their parent, I guess. After I became a teen and could drive, he'd call me in the middle of the night while I was at my mom's house and ask me to rush over because he was sick and needed help. I spent a lot of nights feeding him jello and sitting awake in his room so he could sleep because his medication would make him hallucinate and think demons were going to kill him in his sleep. It wasn't until I was older I realized I missed a lot of my childhood because I had to parent him instead of the other way around. Eventually he found a wife who takes care of him and cut me out of his life. Apparently he tells her stories about how I never spent time with him and never cared because she sends me rants about how awful I am. I understand. My dad is the same way. Till this day every time we talk he is complaining about his life. I'm sorry you had to go through the same thing. I hope you are living a much better life. Mine's pretty simple. We didn't have money for food when I was a kid. Mum was too embarrassed to apply for food stamps, so we went without. But my parents had no issues buying food only for themselves. and refusing to let us have any, including hiding them on high shelves so we couldn't sneak into it. They would eat in front of my sister and I while we sat and stared. They'd get mad and give us each a bite and make us go to our rooms. There would be nothing else in the house to eat, and it didn't matter. As a kid, it sucked, but your parents know what they are doing, right? As an adult, and a parent myself, it's batshit crazy. I could never sit there and eat while my son went hungry. It came out later that my mom was an addict, narcotics and booze, and my dad was more interested in banging any girl who'd have him, including my 16-year-old best friend in HS, than raising any. So yeah, they aren't a part of my life anymore. My in-laws, well mostly my now deceased mill and a brother-in-law swear by trunk food. What is trunk food? It is food that you make, and sometimes cook, sometimes not, and when you go on a road trip, you wrap it up in foil and throw it in the trunk with the spare tire and everything else gross back there. This is only done for long distance trips. When you arrive at your destination, you eat the food. Mill and brother-in-law swore that it makes the food taste better if the food was uncooked. The idea was that being in a hot trunk for several hours would cook it to the desired temperature. In theory, the cakes were probably the safest. She would make small individual spice cake loaves and wrap them up, and then you'd have spice cake with the gentle aroma of car exhaust. She once made an entire birthday cake for me in the same way, except that it was left in the pan and had icing and minimal wrapping. I ate a slice to be polite, but I was being very polite. I didn't eat the rest. Brother-in-law is the worst though. He is Orthodox Jewish and keeps kosher, which is problematic when traveling long distances, so he's used to having to pack food with him. They used to live in South Carolina and he was driving to Miami to catch a flight to Israel a few times before he actually emigrated there. We live in Central Florida and offered to prepare him some kosher food, but he wasn't having it and brought his own meatloaf out of the trunk of a very hot car on a hot summer day. He wanted to share it with us, but I have this thing about food poisoning, so I didn't eat it. You can only be so polite. Mill has since passed away and brother-in-law now lives in Israel, so no more trunk food. My husband, the twin of brother-in-law, has working brain cells and believes strongly in food safety. Thank goodness. My parents were very poor when I was growing up. Affording a babysitter, or any other kind of childcare for that matter, was completely out of the question. My mom worked days and my dad worked nights, so most of the time there was at least one parent home, even if they were sleeping somewhere. On the rare occasions when neither parent was home or had to go get something they couldn't, or didn't want to lug us around for, we were left in the house alone to our own devices. This started happening when I was around 4, so at 4 years old I was left alone with my first sister, who was literally a baby, then at 6 with one sister that was a toddler while the other was literally a baby. It's horrifying to think about what could have happened on those rare days, since, even with a chair, the phone and door locks were out of my reach. Fight over money but continue to constantly spend beyond their means. Not once did they actually sit down together and mediate over their expenditures and priorities. Just more and more fighting. Never communicate clearly or keep consistent expectations. Environment was always chaotic. Neglectful parenting in general, but didn't let us go without food, clothing, or shelter. They had a lot of kids BC religious reasons. Get into another toxic marriage after leaving the first. I love both my parents and all my siblings though. Now grown, I realize they're not superhuman and probably did what they knew how at the time. We used to drive from Michigan to South Dakota to see my grandparents, and my brother and I rode in the bed of an F-150 that had a topper on it. We had an inflatable mattress back there, so we'd just sleep for a lot of the 20+ hour drive. Ours had a folding couch in the back, and my dad had a small TV that would run off of the cigarette lighter. He put the cord through the windows of the topper and the rear window of the truck, plugged it in, and we rolled down the highway catching whatever we could out on the way to go fishing for vacation. Good times, those 1980s. My siblings are a lot older than me, so they were out of the house when I turned 8. Both my parents worked, so I would come home to an empty house and make my own dinner. That alone is sort of odd, but when I was 14, my dad got downsized and started driving a semi. My mom got licensed, too. They were driving from coast to coast in the US, leaving a 14-year-old alone for about 3 weeks a month. It's amazing that I never destroyed the house. and that I actually went to school. For years I couldn't figure out how my parents always knew what I was doing. Sneaking a boin, GF bringing in a bottle of vodka, getting in late after curfew, you name it. I chalked it up to them being parents. I was 21 when I found 4 surveillance monitors in the canning closets downstairs. My mom stole a shopping cart with my brother. I was like 7yo and nearly ratted them out because mom, we don't need that, I don't understand. My family were all Jehovah's Witnesses, so there is a number of things I didn't realize weren't normal until much later in life. Story time, go for it. My grandparents in Italy would burn tons of marijuana plants because it was unknown to them and like an unwanted weed on their farms. I mean, they would never had done anything with it anyways even if they did know, but still, they burned lots of weed. I'm just imagining a bunch of high as heck farm animals falling over and walking in circles and your grandparents being like, huh, well that's probably normal and has nothing to do with those suspicious weeds we'd been burning. Once was told not to wear a seatbelt because too much stuff was in the car. Blackberries were below me. Dad slammed on the brakes. I landed my butt in blackberries. I walk inside a mall to clean up. Mom tries to clean my butt in front of a food court bunch of people. I make her stop and go into a bathroom to clean blackberries off my butt. I started reading this like a list and was very confused that your family considered blackberries to be beneath you, haha. Screamed and raged at me as a way to keep me from having angry outbursts at home and at school. Real freaking smart, Dad. My mom had us each pick out a pebble to put in our shoe each morning. We were told to offer up our suffering for the poor souls in purgatory. Cut to grade 3, gym class. Mrs. Grabowski, our gym teacher. Herosa and P. Why are you limping? There's a pebble in my shoe. So take it out. But what about the poor souls in purgatory? She didn't say another word about it. I quit with the pebbles a few years later, but it wasn't until I was an adult that I realized how screwed up the whole situation was. Yeah, hobbling your kids is totally normal. Your teacher noped the frick out of that situation super quick. She kinda let you down there. Picked me up at the hospital after hip surgery. I was born with a dislocated hip. Had a lot of surgeries as a kid. They were kinda no biggie to me at that point, and had to make a detour to check out an antique clock he was thinking of buying. Left me out in the van in a body cast in the middle of a Wisconsin winter for 20 minutes or so while he haggled. Plaster be cold. When I was very young, maybe 5 or 6, my mother would cuddle with my younger brother and I. She thought it was funny when she pretended to die while holding us. I was terrified and I will always remember that. She would wake up from death and laugh to get a reaction out of us. That is my earliest fricked up memory of her. Oh man, I used to love faking my death as a little kid, usually by posing myself in some twisted position at the bottom of the stairs while my dad was out of the house. It's a shame I couldn't have helped you turn the tables on her. Got home from being bullied for being fat. Told my mum. Asked her for advice. She advised me that I was just ugly and to deal with it. I had an eating disorder for years from this. Still relapse a lot. Self-harm. Low self-esteem. We moved every time I made a friend at school. Eventually got into full-on brawls and fights at school. She got called to the school and even when the other kid or parent would admit they started it or apologized, she wouldn't accept that it wasn't my fault. Everything was my fault. RIP you sodding chain smoking C. I just don't understand these extreme parents. Some think their children can never do wrong, even when faced with proof. Then there's others like your mother who will always see faults in their child no matter what they are told or shown. I hope you get yourself in a better place and stay there. My parents believed that king syrup and butter was a delicious dessert. They also refer red to chocolate covered creme drops as enartos. In my family, that was what Brazil nuts were called. Those were my favorite nut in the nut jars, but I didn't know what they were called until I went through the encyclopedia to match the list on the jar with the pictures in the book. My mom drove from Michigan to Cedar Point, awesome roller coaster park, in Sandusky, Ohio with me curled up in the hatchback of one of those really crappy 1890s Ford Mustangs. I was so geeked to ride the roller coasters I didn't even complain. I see another post about another poor kid who rode to South Dakota in the bed of a pickup truck. So I guess I'll just shush now. I had to hang out in the hatchback of a Mustang while the fire department put the chimney fire out in the house. Also from Michigan. What things did you do as a teenager that you thought you covered up well, but now as an adult, you realize your parents weren't freaking stupid? In back-to-back sentences I asked my dad if he monitored our internet history, and if paying for things online showed up on his credit card statement. Just harmless, unrelated questions. I remember being in 3rd grade and discovering I could erase math problems from my math book. The book came like that, with those massive empty spaces between the problems. God, I was an idiot. Typed to knackedwoman.com into the family computer search browser when I was like 9. Brother and dad entered room and I exited the page thinking that was it. Dad pulled up history and found it, told them I meant to type in nuclear weapons since I was into guns and stuff. They said okay and I thought they bought it. Can't believe I was this freaking stupid. Dang autocorrect. Well, for me, my parents left every weekend from Friday, late Sunday to spend time on their property they bought out in the country. Every weekend. From the time I was 13 plus. So, naturally, my house became the party house for me and my friends. My parents would tell me, no one can come over during this time. So, my girlfriend would come over and stay the night. We'd have parties of 20 plus people in my quiet suburban house. Probably had the cops called around 5-8 times. I knew the main patroller's name, and he knew my name house. Every Sunday, I would clean, like a madman, the entirety of the house. I would mop, I would vacuum, I would dust, I would take out the trash. I would dump hundreds of bottles of beer alcohol in a public dumpster about 15 minutes away. I would comb the yard for torn pieces of beer labels, bottle caps, etc. If someone vomited, I'd get shout and clean that sucker out. Only twice did I think I was caught. Once when my dad found a mixer with a preloaded Cosmopolitan under the sink which apparently some drunk girl had hid there, and then again, when I had mistakenly placed the table decoration in a completely wrong way on the table runner. The first, I claimed ignorance and said it must have been the house cleaner who comes every other Friday, and the second I fessed up and said me and the boys had played some poker on the long table while they were gone. No repercussions. Fast forward 4 years, I'm graduating college, talking with my parents, and I made mention that I used to have some parties while they were gone, occasionally, to which they laughed. Yeah, we knew you had parties. We got called probably 5+ times by the police, and about 40+ times from the freaking Jones neighbors, complaining about your parties. Plus, bollerot a few. Every Sunday we came back the house was cleaner than when we left it. Or they. That's probably why they never told you they knew. If you knew, you wouldn't have cleaned so well afterwards. When I was in high school I would smoke weed in my room and do the old towel under the door trick. Of course my parents would call me out on it being there and would make comments, but I was pretty sure I had them tricked with the incense I was burning. Then one day I must have pushed it too far by taking gravity bong rips with my buddy. I hear a stern knocking on the door and an open up chemical burn. We need to talk. My friend and I in our incredibly stoned state are going ogadogad, and in my genius I stammered out, I can't, we're naked. This is followed by an "oh we came" downstairs awkwardly 30 minutes later, and my dad and I never spoke of that moment again. TLDR. Dad knows I smoke pot in bedroom with friend. I turn the tables and make it more awkward for my dad to talk about it than is worth his while. My family's house was 3 stories. The top floor being one big room that spanned the length of the house. Me and my girlfriend at the time would have mad monkey sex all day every day. It was right after HS, we were both unemployed. We would try to be prepared if someone were to come up as in a blanket to throw over us, etc. One day I was downstairs while she was on the 3rd floor and it sounded like the fricking roof was caving in. I went back upstairs and asked her if she had been jumping around or something, and she said she had just been walking around. I realized then that my parents had definitely heard us fricking every single goddamn time. They never said a word or came upstairs. That reminds me of a good friend who told me that she got rug burn on her back from having intense sex in her room, which was right above her parents'. Her parents wouldn't have mentioned anything if the burn weren't sticking out from under her midriff top. They used it as an opener to say something like, "Honey, we hope he didn't hurt you. It sounded rougher than usual last night." When I was the tender age of 14, a rather aggressive girl took to me and she would sneak over, sometimes without informing me she was coming over, when my parents were away. One day we decided to go up to my tree house where I used to read when I was younger. My dad came home early from work, the one friggin' time in his life he ever did that, so we panic. My tree house was situated right over an alley with a good 12-foot drop over the fence into said alley. So she decides to jump out of the tree into the alley, forgetting her shoes in the process. I hadn't been in that tree house for years, so I knew my dad would be suspicious if I just strolled out. There under the blanket was an old copy of The Hobbit, so I grabbed it and went in. Instead of just walking to my room like I should have, I decided to have long engrossing conversation him about the plot of The Hobbit, you know, to convince him that's why I was up there. Only thing is, I never read The Hobbit, but I knew my dad hadn't either, so I came up with the plot for The Hobbit right on the spot. It was no Tolkien, but I think my plot was pretty dang good. Come to find out years later in passing conversation with my mom that my dad in fact loved The Hobbit. He had seen the girl jump out of the tree house and listened to my fake retelling of The Hobbit because he was too bad but to care that I had a girl over. TLDR. Came up with a fake plot for The Hobbit to convince my dad I wasn't with a girl in my tree house. Speaking as a father, hearing your son make up an entire plot for a book you know well would be worth the entertainment value. I had a huge house party when my parents were gone. I moved all the breakables into bedrooms and locked them so nothing was broken stolen. I took before photos so I'd remember how to arrange everything afterwards. When they returned, my mom was all a few things seem off in here. That is, statues in a cabinet. In the moment I thought I outwitted them. They definitely knew. I'm honestly shocked how much they didn't know. I tell my mother stories now and she's horrified that she had no idea what I was up to. I was a terrible teenager, or maybe a great teenager depending on how you look at it. Ditto. Then again, back then my mom was a promiscuous alcoholic, so it doesn't really mean I was very clever. Entered breasts, nudity, nudism and various other searches in Microsoft Encarta for a school project. I remember nudism because that's the page that I left on the screen when my mom came into the room. BTW, there's no good titty pics on Encarta. I was brewing prison hooch. I innocently asked my mom, a biologist, how alcohol is made, and she explained in full detail the process of fermentation. I then asked if we had mason jars, then baking yeast. Then I started squeezing gallons of fresh orange juice. I drank a 6-pack of beer one time and put the caps back on, told them the beer had evaporated. I would sneak outside for a cigarette, put perfume on and was convinced they couldn't smell it. I would come home stoned out of my mind and tell them my eyes were red because of allergies. Middle of winter in Canada, not much to be allergic to. Jizzing in on my socks, then putting them in my dirty clothes basket. Forgetting who washes my clothes. Having 3 boys, I think my mom's probably seen her fair share of CM covered socks and underpants, and for that reason alone we as a family are more lenient when she talks during the football. My mom made me start doing my own laundry when I was 13 and I just realized why. Sorry, mom. I'm with you OP. Every night I would excuse myself from dinner early so I could masturbate and I would announce to everyone, yeah, I'm really tired, so I'm just gonna hit the hay. Don't disturb me. Worst thing was sneaking out to get some tissues. Just got a bit of a runny nose. I smoked a lot of pot all throughout high school. I would come home with fire truck red eyes and eat half the food in the kitchen. But my parents never confronted me about it, so I thought I was so slick. About a year ago, I'm 24 now, I figured it had been long enough to let them in on my little secret. They just laughed and basically said, yeah, we knew. But you kept your grades up so we let it go. I smoked a lot of pot growing up too. I noticed a pattern where my mom would say I smell like pot and I would react defensively and she would know. Inversely, one day she accused me of smelling like pot, to which I replied calmly, maybe because I just crap my pants. That managed to perfectly defuse the situation. I was stoned at the computer eating some Starbursts. My mom walks in. says hi and asks what I'm eating. Look down at the candy very confused. Okay, it's strawberry flavored. It's called Star. I'm eating starberries. My mom stares at me. Ooh, okay, nailed it. I was not a good student in Hebrew school. When you did bad on a test, you had to get your parents to sign off on your exam. Well, I saw something on the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air that I thought might work. Basically, Will needed a signature on something and told his uncle that he could analyze his signature if he liked. So he got people to write their signatures on one piece of paper, and then when it was his uncle's turn, he lifted up the top sheet and made him write it on the bottom sheet, which was his test that he needed signed. It worked on the show, so I figured why not try it in real life, and guess what? It worked. I love that you took tips from the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. That alone is glorious. That's the reason why I masturbated with my doors wide open, for everyone to see. Trust me, no one wants to walk into you masturbating. I left a note on the door to my basement saying my parents couldn't come down for 6 hours because me and my friend were doing a science experiment. We were tripping for the first time. Now that I think of it, my parents could have only guessed we were experimenting with drugs, or experimenting with being lesbians. I never spoke to my parents about it. When I first realized you could find pictures of naked ladies on the internet, I asked my mom how to spell naked. I was sitting at the computer. My dad grew tired with me spending so much time on the computer, and so he bought a program called Kids Watch or something like that. Its purpose was to make it so I could only access my machine at certain times of the day with a monthly time limit. So I used to just screw with the BIOS when I ran out of time. And he caught on eventually and passworded it. I thought I was pretty sneaky when I popped the CMOS battery out of my motherboard to reset the password, and continued to mess with the date settings to circumvent the child locks, but he probably knew. Mine isn't very exciting. My mother would prepare all these carefully arranged party trays of food for Christmas or Thanksgiving. I would eat as many of the delicious things as possible at it, and carefully arrange everything else a little further apart to cover my tracks. I would steal liquor from my parents' cabinet in high school. They didn't drink, so it must have been fairly obvious to them when the bottles they'd get as gifts would work their way down from almost full to almost empty. I also had a bad habit of drunk dialing them when I went to college for the first month or so. They never said anything about that either. The only time I actually got a lecture was when I was downloading PR0N on the family computer. It was the mid-90s, and the .jpg files have grown to take up a full 1/3 of the computer's paltry hard disk before my father started looking for what was eating up the valuable space. Lesson learned. I stored them on zip disk instead. Next time you talk to your parents, I dare you to ask them this question. What did you do that you thought you had covered up well, but they actually noticed? And of course, report back here with stories. I would do this, but I know that one of them would be about jerking it, and I couldn't take that. I would sleep over at my ex's all the time, which my father would have flipped his crap if he knew. So he would ask me, the mornings after, what time I had gotten home at the night before. I would lie and say some outrageous time like 2 AM because I knew he was asleep then. He would say okay and the topic would be over. I later came to realize my dad woke up before me for work, so he would see my car wasn't in the driveway in the AM, obviously making it clear I didn't come home. I imagined the look on your dad's face, and it broke my heart. Dated other guys. I'm going to go hang out with Amanda. I actually had a friend named Amanda. My parents told me they had a joke to it. Yeah, a man. Duh. Not me, really, but my brother, who I watched go through teenagerdom while I was an adult. He'd do things like walk in the house with a lump of chew under his lip and talk to us like it wasn't there, and deny that it was when we called him out. He either thought he was incredibly slick or that we were completely stupid. He thought that since we wouldn't hear it in his mouth when he spoke, that meant we wouldn't notice it sticking out under his lip. He's 20 now, and lies constantly, but is horrible at it. I just don't understand why he bothers anyway. Most habitual liars are both really bad at it and delusional about how good they are at it, no matter how many times they get called out. My uncle is exactly this way. What you doing? Ein Doc. Quickly minimize P-site on IE6. Nothing dad, just reading up in Carter for my history project. You gotta see the speech they have. So cool. Okay. Don't waste much time though, son. Looking back, I'm sure glad my dad didn't corner me about PE even though he clearly knew. And Carter, wow, I had forgotten about that. I skipped school in high school so much. I was making up hours after school to graduate. I thought I was being so sneaky. When I graduated high school, dad asked me, "So, where did you go when you were cutting class?" My parents had known all along but never told me. When I was still teaching college, I would be so amused by the excuses. One time, one of the excuses was overheard, and students and I started chatting informally about brown nosing, BS, and such. The students were so confident that none of their profs knew what they were up to, until I reminded them that most of those profs had 6-10 years experience as college students, given the requirements for graduate studies. The expressions on their faces were amusing. I said something like, "Yeah, we know what you're doing. We all did it too. For years. When we let it slide, that's not because you fooled us, but because we decided to let it slide." I was smiling, obviously not condemning them. Excuses for the rest of the semester were way less stale, and usually had more to do with concerts gone to, wild parties, and crazy roommates, not yet another grandparent or pet dying. Parents get technically savvy uncle to set up parental controls and schedule for PC time so I could only use it for 1 hour a day and could only access Google, Wikipedia, and a few other websites. Bootable Linux was the most handy thing in the world, and thus all my programming knowledge now comes from my insatiable need to jack off. When I was young I would beat it in bed, toes pointed straight out, holding breathe like an amateur. I'd splodge into the tiny gap beside bed and wall. Years later when I moved out and we pulled the bed away there was so much man sauce caked on the wall and yellow I nearly fainted. My mom said you must have vomited one day coming home drunk and forgot about it. Yes mom, that's exactly what happened. Poker face. That's freaking nasty. When I was in high school, I had a couple of bottles of pucker in my bedroom closet. Yeah, we used to put it in Sonic slashes. I went to college and kind of forgot about the bottles. My room was in the basement, and we had some minor flooding, so my dad moved everything that was touching the floor, including the contents of my closet, into a pile on my bed. When I came back from college to go through the stuff, the bottles were gone. My dad apparently had discreetly disposed of them for me without telling my mom. Cool dad. Mine did this with my bubbler I left at home. He pulled me aside and mentioned that he found it, and that he wouldn't tell mom as long as I didn't get caught and wasn't an idiot. He then went on to mention that he'd often climbed onto the roof of his childhood home to get high. I love that man. I used to think that aerosol deodorant masked the sweet smell of weed. Then, much later, I realized that my parents were in fact rather liberal. Ho hum. I played travel hockey when I was in high school and my girlfriend was coming with me to a game a couple hours away when I was 15 or 16. My dad was driving in the front seat and we were sitting in the back with a blanket covering us. She gets cold easily, so it seemed legitimate. So, for some reason, we decided it'd be a great idea to start teasing each other under the blanket and she starts to get me excited. This continues into a full-on hand job. Of course, we thought we're being stealthy and it seemed like the slowest hand job in this history of the earth with the blanket not moving at all. Of course looking back on it, he probably took one look in the rear view mirror, saw my face, and decided this was something that would just be better not brought up. TLDR. GF in high school gave me a HJ under a blanket in the backseat of a car while my dad drove me to a hockey game. He knew. I stole a cassette tape from another student. I thought the teacher saw me, but she never commented. Found out later that the teachers often felt bad for us, cause we're a lower income family. I still feel guilty to this day about stealing that tape and still haunts me to this day. The worst part was the cassette was Vanilla Ice. Whited out my grades on a report card and retyped in better grades. Told my dad the school made a mistake. My dad let it slide. Years later I found out that my dad tried the same thing when he was young and his dad came down hard on him. I was about 13 years old, sitting in the living room one day. I was on the couch minding my own business when I got extremely frisky. Between the living room and my room was the dining room where my dad was sitting at the table eating. I took a deep breath and went into stealth mode. I was rock hard, wearing gym shorts by the way. I got up, grabbed a tissue box, and headed to the dining room. I walked in the dining room holding a tissue box casually over my crotch area. I didn't acknowledge the dad, but crept to the right towards my room. I realized I had no hope shuffling sideways with a tissue box over my crotch, so I attempted to turn while covering my boner. I swiftly turned right but totally fumbled the tissue box maneuver. I'm sure he caught a glimpse of my boner profile. Still beat off. Bonus. When I was younger I went to a private school. Every week we would have chapel. We'd all go to a big church building. The boys wore dress pants and button-ups. Girls wore skirts. Week after week I would get boners during chapel. Not a problem until we have to get up and exit down the middle aisle. Luckily we carried our own Bibles to and from the building. Guess what book covered my boner every week I left the church? The Bible. Equals D. The boys wore dress pants and button-ups. Girls wore skirts. I'm going to assume the blouses were implied. I've posted this in another thread but it's worthy. I didn't find out about this until my 18th birthday when my father told this story in front of my entire social life. When I was 15 and home alone I was watching P on the family television. I had the volume up rather loud and was vigorously pleasuring myself as only a 15-year-old can. My father came home, snuck through the house into the kitchen, grabbed his lunch and ate it in the backyard and left via the side gate. I was completely unaware of this. Not wanting to embarrass me in my delicate teen years, he waited until I was successfully through them and cut me down at knee height. I always denied that I smoke. Every time. After a 6-hour-long drive to my parents' house, during which I smoked a lot, my dad would greet me, hug me and tell me I smelled like roses. It was so much better than making me lie to him. I'm more worried about what they thought I was doing that I wasn't actually doing. My parents did this all the time. They found some evidence and would come up with a story on their own. For instance, one time I was doing a prop project for theater and had a bunch of empty cough syrup bottles in my room. We had to have a sit down talk about abusing medicine. I don't think there's many parents that would let a bunch of cough syrup bottles slide. Not quite on topic, but when I was younger, grade school age, my grandpa used to let me cheat like mad in Parcheesi. He'd just look away while I cleverly changed the dice. Also my brother and sisters and I used to regularly discover and steal his candy that we'd find in the drawers of his desk, which we weren't supposed to be looking in his home office, which we weren't supposed to be in. I smiled each time in the years after he passed away when it dawned on me that I wasn't fooling him in the least. I see a lot of comments about going into the bathroom with a laptop. Am I the only one that proudly marches into the bathroom in front of my parents with a laptop? I once did a 40 minutes Guild Wars mission on the toilet. Best poop of my life. I cut all the good pages out of my dad's penthouse, then asked my parents if they would please not look in my desk drawer, because I was going to keep their Christmas presents in there. When I was a youngster, trying to smoke some pot at the house was always dangerous. I never knew exactly when my mom would be home, so my best idea was to turn the shower on full heat, wait for the steam to build, then start smoking bowls underneath the exhaust fan. I thought it was super effective and I was super sneaky, and for 2 years, grade 10 and 11, my mom never mentioned anything, even though she had come home while I was showering many times. One day, I was preparing a session in the bathroom but I had yet to turn on the shower or fan, so when my mom came charging upstairs needing to use the bathroom she didn't think to knock. Needless to say she started yelling at me, and in the midst of her screaming she says, "And I know you've been smoking in the bathroom for years, I juice." The daily arguments weren't worth it for her, and for that I will be forever grateful. Honestly, I'd probably be more pee about the high energy bill from all those unnecessary showers you weren't taking. When I was a child I ate my pet goat. I didn't know at the time. My grandma said that he ran away. What are some cover-up stories your family told you as a child that you later on found the truth about? I had a dearly beloved goldfish from when I was about 7 or 8. His name was Golden Goldie. My adult sister was charged with taking care of it when we went on vacation. Of course it died under her care. I think she just forgot she had it. So as a cover story she told me someone kidnapped him and she couldn't afford the ransom. My parents played along for a while, finding it amusing that I actually believed her. They planned to tell me after a few days that he was dead, but before they could I called 911. Antics ensued. Calling a sibling's bluff. Always a good time. I grew up in hurricane and tornado country, with some pretty devastating storms passing through during my childhood. We moved when I was still a kid, and years later when I mentioned I never remembered the storms, my mom casually told me that because any time there was a storm warning, I'd get you kids to go play camping in the basement so you wouldn't cry. I did remember camping in the basement, which I always loved because it was the only time I was allowed down there and I was allowed to pack snack supplies. My family hates camping and it was the only time they'd ever indulge me, as the youngest child. Clever. That's actually a pretty smart way to keep kids calm and have supplies throughout a storm. As a child, my first pet was a puppy. He was brown so I named him Root Beer. We'd play all the time. He'd run away and I'd spend hours looking for him. One day, some bullies were beating me up, so my dog decided to pee all over their bags, thus stopping the fight. Fun dog and loyal to the end. Well, I ended up moving down south to live with my father, and his dog and my dog never got along. They couldn't be in the same location, otherwise a fight to the death would happen. I'd always try to keep them separate as best as a 14-year-old kid could. One day I came home and he was gone. Dad said he ran away. Nothing surprising. He always does this. I spent the next 8 hours searching the entire side of town for him. Dad even told me he called up the pound and they hadn't picked him up. I cried for days, thinking my dog was kidnapped or dead. Over the years, things clicked together in my growing mind. My dad took him to the pound himself. About 5-10 years later, I call him out on it. Sure enough, I was right. I still miss that little guy. When I was a kid I had these two goldfish, Bubbles and Swimmer. I loved those two. I would have my mom carry their bowl into the living room so they could watch TV with me. I used to reach into the tank and pet them. I saved all of my money to upgrade them into a tank, and I had them for several years. Sometimes, these fish would get sick. You know, maybe they couldn't swim anymore, only floated on the top. Every time this happened, my mom would take them to the vet, and he always fixed them so they could swim again. Sometimes they came back a different color. Black spots? Oh, just the medication the vet put on his scales. It took me until high school to realize my beloved goldfish in my tank weren't the same ones I brought home in kindergarten. I gotta say, I think this is genius. I know it's not really right to lie to your children, but explaining death to a small child is really hard. They will unfortunately learn eventually, but this method kinda prolongs it a little more. Also, I remember when my first fish died, not only was I terribly sad, but after we flushed it I refused to use that toilet for several days. When I was 8 years old my mom got married and my family moved into a new house with my stepdad. He hung an ollie painting in the living room with a man in a boat on a lake. A couple months later I noticed that the man and the boat were no longer in the painting. I asked my stepdad about it and he said there was never a man and a sailboat. Fast forward a few more months, I noticed the painting once again had the man in the sailboat. I asked my stepdad about it and he said it always had the sailboat. I was baffled. It wasn't until years later that I discovered the truth. My stepdad had two very similar paintings, one with a sailboat and a man and one without them. A couple times a year he would switch the paintings out just to frick with me. It's something we both laugh about now, but for a while I was really pissed at him. For years I thought there was something supernatural about that painting. Turns out my stepdad was just kind of a funny butthole. Yay for a story that doesn't involve your sociopathic parent offing your beloved family pet. Also, LOL. My dad said that my pet hermit crabs ran away while I was at summer camp. He had actually just forgot to feed them. For years, I thought that they had run off to form some sort of runaway hermit crab colony where they would finally be free of their bonds of oppression. Viva la cravolution. I always loved digging for dinosaur bones as a kid. Never found any though, until one day I was digging around in my backyard and found some. I thought it was the coolest thing. When I was 12 or so, my mom told me that my grandmother had saved dried out chicken bones and they buried them for me. Up until then I always wondered why we weren't trying rich for my archaeological discovery. AWW, that's actually very sweet. D. I stayed with my mother after returning from living abroad for a month. She has a hobby farm with cows. One in particular was amazingly friendly and would follow you around the yard when you'd walk outside. His name was Corky. I came home from school one weekend. We made steaks, and as you can probably tell, we ate him. My mom said, "How does Corky taste?" I seriously did not eat beef for about 2 years after that. Thanks, Mom. My dad did almost the exact same thing to my little sister. When I was a child, I caught my mother putting money under my pillow for the tooth fairy. She immediately told me that the tooth fairy couldn't make it that day and asked her to do it in her place. I believed this until I saw her putting all the presents out for Santa, and she used the exact same story. Parents told me that my uncle was murdered because his friend at a rival company was jealous of my uncle's financial success. This was when I was 12. Found out 2 years ago that in actuality my uncle was sleeping with his friend's wife. I'm now 27. Once, when I lived at my grandparents', a cat turned up, snuck under the house and gave birth to a litter of kittens. No pics. I was a cameraless kid at the time. Eventually cat got hit by a truck and we found the kittens, and I was thrilled to have 4 tiny fluffy little cat babies to play with. Shortly after, the kittens disappeared and I was told they ran away. 10 years later I brought it up and my grandma cracked up and said no. I left them on the doorstep of the vet because they were so young. TLDR. Kittens. ETA. Visited the grandparents and got the rest of the story. My imagination must have inserted the doorstep part because she told me she dropped them off at the vet and followed them up a few months later. Apparently all was sold. Who knows how true that last part was? Well, at least they didn't do the classic put them in a loaded bag and drop them down the drink. Mom used to tell me we couldn't have cats because she hated them. Turns out a kitten had crawled into the engine area of the car, and while we were driving away it got run through the engine and slung out the back of the car and she saw it. I kind of don't blame her anymore. I had a dog that supposedly ran away. Turned out my dad took him to the back 40 and shot him because he was a pain in the butt. Exact same thing happened to me when I was about 8. My dad took my dog hunting and he ran away. Found out years later my dad shot him. You're right. Dads can be a pain in the butt. I had a pet rabbit that I adored as an 11-year-old girl that my family and I adopted from a local farm. His name was Blackie, and he was the sweetest, most fun little guy you could imagine. We even had epic wanderings to find him dandelions and whatnot, because I researched that rabbits like that. 2 years after adopting him, enter my idiot cousin, who left Blackie's pen open one summer night after she played with him. The next morning, my mom told me Blackie ran away. The truth is, a dog got into his open hutch and ate him. My mom found his legs and bits of fur amidst the hutch, and cleaned it up before I woke up for cheerleading practice. She didn't tell me about Blackie's real fate until I was in college. I was shocked, but as an adult, I understood why she would do it. I probably would have had a nervous 13-year-old breakdown, then beaten the living bejesus out of my cousin. BTW, my cousin is still considered one of the raging idiots in my moron-filled clutch of family members. TLDR. Mum tells me beloved pet rabbit ran away. In reality my cousin left the top hatch of his cage open and he was eaten by a dog. I had a rabbit named Blackie too. He was sweet. I loved him as soon as he peed on my little sister's lap. I built a scatter park in my front yard when I was 13. A really decent one too. Made from blueprints. I came home from school to see most of it was missing. My dad said someone must have stole it. I then later found out he sold it to some kids a few miles from my house. My mother told me my biological father had been cheating on her. She took me as far away from him as possible. Decades later found out it was actually the other way around. By a lot. I freaking hate people who manipulate the truth to make themselves look good and someone innocent look bad. My funny Catholic uncle wanted to let God do the healing after my grandpa had a heart attack and needed quintuple bypass surgery. As a result, he was disowned from the family for a good 4 years, in which nobody saw or heard from him or his family. Turns out he was in jail for smuggling pot into the country. When I was a kid, I had 2 baby chickens as pets that had died. I came home from school and they were gone. My mom just said they flew to America to meet us there. We were living in Kuwait at the time, but as a family were working towards moving to California. How did they die, you ask? Well, these chicks were sold by street vendors. Basically, they were dipped into buckets of colorful paint. Mine were red and then put on a hot metal plate with a heat source underneath and ledges to fence them in. Music would play from the boombox next to them as they would hop and rotate their feet on the hot plate since they couldn't fly or get off. They were sold as dancing rainbow chicks. How could I not want them as a child? Anyway, after you buy them, they apparently die a few days later, after failing to dance at home, mind you, cause the paint they were dipped in dries in their nostrils and suffocates them, and maybe poisons them too. Not sure. It would all be hilarious if it wasn't so heinous. As a child, I had a fascination with walking down to the river, locating the largest bullfrog possible, and bringing it back home with me, where I would select an appropriate sized pan from the kitchen, put some water in it and place the frog in the water-filled pan, in the garden, with no lid. My mother didn't appreciate it. I could never figure out why there were so many pancakes frogs on the street behind our house, and then I did. I had a pet duck for a few years when I was younger. One day I came home from school to no duck and my parents told me it had died and was already on the way to a special pet graveyard in a country I couldn't visit. So I assumed my dead duck was in the bin or something, and grieved for it. A few months ago I found out that one day my duck had gotten into the house, pooped all over our dining room, and so my mother lured it into a laundry basket and set it free in the nearest canal. I still don't understand why she didn't just say it had flown away or something. Why did she have to say it was dead? Totally thought you were going to say lured it into a laundry basket and set it on fire. When I was little, I thought marriages only counted when you had the big party with the big white dress and a priest and such. So when I asked my parents why my aunt and uncle weren't married for real, they just said that they loved each other and their hearts a lot, and that's all that mattered. A couple years ago I found out that it was because my uncle was dating the daughter of a drug kingpin and banging my now aunt on the side, and got my aunt pregnant. So they had to get married for the American citizenship and elope so they wouldn't get murdered. TLDR. Parents told me my uncle and aunt didn't get married because they loved each other, when in reality, they got married to avoid getting murdered. My tale of tragedy is similar to that of the OP. When I was around 5 or 6, my aunt bought a giant fish at the market. It was so fresh, it was actually alive. I wouldn't allow her to slaughter it, so I filled up the tub with water and kept it there for what I thought were days or even weeks. It was probably just a few hours. Time is different when you are a kid. I played with it and was so happy. I must have taken a nap or something, only to wake up and find my treacherous and murderous parents and aunt gnawing away at my friend. I must have understood what happened, as their weak attempts of denial, begging for my forgiveness, and promises of substitute friends or riches had no effect on my attitude towards them till this very day. We found a feral cat we called Minu that attacked my sister and hurt her really badly. Mum gave us a big line about putting Minu to sleep with chloroform and peaceful deaths for dangerous animals, blah blah blah. What actually happened, I found out decades later, was Dad crushed its skull with a hammer. Then, a week later he read in the local rag that there was a rabies epidemic. Any animals that attacked or behaved oddly should be brought to the CSPCA. Dad calls and says, "What if the cat is dead? That's okay. They test the brains. They only need the head. What if the head is damaged?" I still can't believe he didn't get in crap with them for that one. When I was about 4, I opened the fridge to discover a pitcher of delicious blue Kool-Aid. When I asked my Kool-Aid sipping dad if I could have some, he told me no, because it was made with tap water, which was poisonous to children. We usually drank our water from the fridge. He denies this ever happened, but I will never forget his flagrant Kool-Aid hogging lies. Never. Dad gave me a drug talk when I was in middle school. Said he'd never smoked pot and we signed some contract provided by Dare. A couple decades later, taking a road trip with him, he tells me about the amazing dope he used to smoke with his college friends at Patriots games. He also told me on that trip he was juggling another girl when he first was dating my mom. TMI, Dad. Well, I've never smoked dope or juggled girls either. RIP Dad. I have a twin brother. We were born around a month too early, and my mom had to have a C-section. But we were very healthy. At family gatherings, whenever the story of our birth was touched upon, things would kind of go quiet and the subject would change. And my brother and I were told that our parents were so lucky to have us. We always thought it was because my mom was older, so it was a riskier pregnancy, or the fact that we were sideways in the womb. But a year ago we put the pieces together and it became abundantly clear. Upon birth, my brother was significantly larger than me. It turns out my mother had to induce labor to prevent my twin brother from starving me to death in utero. What a sucker. Poor goat. I had goldfish named Happy and Birthday. They mysteriously disappeared one day. But probably the worst thing was when my puppy died. We'd only had him for a year, but he really wasn't that bright. I came home from school one day and couldn't find him, so I asked my stepdad, who told me that Teddy had gotten hit by a car. 10 years later, my mom confessed that he had actually drowned in the pool. He had a habit of tossing his ball around to entertain himself. I guess one day it fell in the pool, and he jumped in to get it. That particular day, the ladder wasn't in the pool, and he couldn't get out. They didn't tell me out of fear I'd never swim in the pool again. I really hope this doesn't get buried. A friend of mine has the same exact name as his father. He grew up thinking that it was a family tradition to name the firstborn son after the dad. Turns out my friend's dad was an alcoholic who was drunk at his son's birth. When it came time to sign my friend's new name on his birth certificate, his dad thought they were asking for a signature. Ergo, they have the same name. This happened to a guy I knew. The mother wasn't drunk. She just wrote her name in the wrong place when he was born and didn't realize until much later. Somehow, his name was legally Karen until he was about 10. When I was a kid, I used to have this horrible shirt with a hole in it that had a cartoon flower pot on the front. It was really ratty, but it was my favorite, and I would steal it out of the laundry hamper so I could wear it every day. My mother didn't like this because I had so many other nice shirts that I refused to wear. One day I was choosing my outfit to coordinate with my favorite flower pot shirt, and I couldn't find it anywhere. I went to my mother, who said she thought the garbage man stole it. Obviously this was quick thinking by my mother, as the garbage truck was just going by. I stood on my porch yelling at the garbage truck as it drove by, shouting the meanest things my 4-year-old self knew. I don't remember how I found out that my mom threw out the shirt, but I do remember not talking to my mom for a day or two, and her laughing at my ridiculousness. Every single year for Easter, my wife, when she was a kid, would get a pet rabbit, because the one from the year before had to go live at the zoo. And every year her grandmother serves rabbit for Easter. They would even go so far to have another family member call the house on Easter to say how well the rabbit was doing at the zoo. So to the OP, my wife can relate. Well, at least the rabbit didn't go to waste and they got a cute new bunny every year. When I was little, my parents always told me that I had 2 grandmas, but only 1 grandpa. I found out years and years later by searching on the internet that it wasn't true. Turns out, I have a 2nd grandpa, but he has been in jail my entire life. Better than the alternative. You really have only 1 grandpa and your parents are half siblings. I grew up in a rural area in Kentucky. I had a lab mix named Bailey. When I was about 8, my aunt and uncle were visiting. They took me out shopping one day, and when I got back, Bailey was missing. It happened every once in a while, so I shrugged it off. During dinner, we all heard a faint scratching at the door. It was Bailey. I ran to the door with my brother and let her in. Thing is, she was covered in blood and was limping. My father grabbed his shotgun and shot her. Turns out, my dad got tired of taking care of her, so he decided to kill her with a sledgehammer. Thing is, she didn't die. I have plenty of other crappy pet stories if you'd like to hear. That is horrifying. I wasn't terribly bothered when my dad had to put animals down with shotguns. but bludgeoning and then shooting it right in front of you is a lot much. When I was about 8 we had this awful goat named Leroy. It would attack the other animals and caused lots of destruction on our property. We couldn't allow my 2-year-old brother to go outside because the goat would immediately attack him. One day I noticed that Leroy was missing and I found my father in the kitchen butchering some sort of animal. "Is that Leroy?" I asked him. "No, we gave Leroy away. This is a sheep," he responded. I watched him suspiciously for several minutes before I left the room muttering, "Looks like Leroy to me." That phrase has been our family's method of calling bulls ever since. This needs more upvotes. Also, my family will definitely wonder when I start saying "looks like Leroy to me" to call BS. We were poor and kept chicken and rabbits in our backyard, so we can eat. I knew that we ate the chickens, but I never found out until later why our rabbits vanished. When I did find out, that was it. I never ate that again. For a long time I didn't realize that the chicken I ate in nugget form were the same animal as chickens on farms. I was very shocked when I made the connection. I started developing around the age of 11. At 14, I noticed something. My sister was a C cup and mom was a DD, but I was barely a B. When I asked mom about this, she told me to look at your sister and I. They'll grow. At 16, not much had changed in the breast area, so I asked again. Mom's reply had changed. "Oh, I had a boob job after you were born. The doctor went through the armpits so I don't have any scars. Your sister just got lucky. If you really want some, I'll buy you some when you're older." I decided to be happy with what I have. I almost expected this to be a "you were adopted" story. When I was about 6 my family dropped me off at my grandparents' house saying they had to go to the supermarket and should be back soon. They came back about a week later. They had gone to Vegas. Whoa, it's like a typical family pet story, but you were the pet. I caught a shrew mouse when I was a little kid. Was the cutest little thing ever. I proudly brought it home and built it a nice little terrarium where it could chill. The next day it was gone. My parents told me it had escaped, but after a while I found out that they released it back into the wild. I never forgave this treachery. Well, it's not like they put it in a stew. They gave it freedom. This one isn't as scarring as the original, but funny nonetheless. My mom is kind of an evil genius when it comes to punishments and manipulation. When I say manipulation, I mean the harmless kind. What exactly does that mean? I'll explain. Every Christmas, my mom would tell my sister and I that she hid an ornament on the Christmas tree, and if we found it, we'd get an extra gift that wasn't under the tree. So of course, we'd go and grab every ornament off the tree and show it to my mom. "Is it this one?" "Nope." "Go put it in the box." "This one?" "Nope." When we finally did find it, she'd bust out the secret gift, which was usually a VHS of whatever Disney movie had just been released. It wasn't until years later that I realized the secret ornament was always the last fricking ornament that we took off the tree. Every fricking time. I was genuinely upset a little bit that I could be so easily manipulated, and then horrified that my mother would think of that, then impressed that my mom thought of that. I have yet to move on to the next stage. TLDR. Odds of getting 2 5-year-olds to dismantle your Christmas tree by asking them 0%. Odds of getting 2 5-year-olds to dismantle your Christmas tree by tricking them into thinking it's a game and they'll get something out of it they wouldn't have otherwise 100%. I am going to remember this trick for the future me. I grew up in Idaho and was raised loving Jake Plummer, a mediocre quarterback that grew up and went to high school in Boise, and later was in the NFL for a few seasons. While my sister was in middle school attending a basketball camp at Capitol High, Plummer's high school, he showed up and signed autographs for her. They told me that night, and in a fit of excitement I begged her to take my brand new football and get him to sign it. The next night I got my football back signed and all. I wouldn't let anyone touch it or play with it. Years later my sister let slip that they couldn't find him the next day, so my mom just forged his signature. I wasn't ever really upset because now I got to play with my awesome football. Plus super mom points for pulling that one off. Separate story: my GF had a miniature pinscher when she was 9 that they owned for a couple years. One day the dog ran away and was never seen again. Turns out her mom decided one day that she didn't like the dog and drove it a city over and just dropped it off in the street and left. 12 years later, just this last year, her mom confessed to the family. I really don't like her mom. In elementary school I came out of the shower and my mom handed me a towel with dark red splotches on it. I told her the towel was dirty and she said it was just makeup. Years later I realized it was her dried period blood. Freaking B. Somewhat related. Saw a towel covered in a lot of blood. My mom told me that my sister had unexpectedly gotten her period. Found out later it was a suicide attempt. I had a pet tarantula when I was around 10. My mom absolutely hated it, but I thought it was awesome watching it eat crickets and other bugs. One day I come home from school and it is dead, with crickets eating at it. My mom told me that she accidentally put too many in there and they just zerged down my spider. I found out a couple of months ago that she in fact poisoned it to death. Parents of Reddit, what was the moment you realized you may have accidentally raised an butthole? When my sons were 12 and 13, the older one stole $600 from my wife and I. He gave the younger one half. When they were caught and everything was said and done, the younger son told us that we didn't have the right to take his money from him because he didn't steal it. That was when I knew. Now ages 19 and 20, the older son has long grown out of it. The younger one has never stopped stealing and lying. Before moving out he told me that he has always resented me for locking things up and, I'm quoting him here, not letting me take whatever I want from you. It amazes me because we raised all 4 of our kids the same way and the other 2 have always been good kids and kind-hearted. Oh well. I realized I was stranded in the bathroom with no toilet paper and called for my son. He demanded $10. I reminded him he's not so old he can't be left on a doorstep. He gave me 2 squares of toilet paper. You got 1 more square than I would have expected, lol. When I watched my younger son walk out on the porch, pick up a plastic wiffle bat, look at it, look at his older brother sitting on the porch steps, look back at the bat, and then haul back and crack his brother's head like Babe Ruth popping one out of the park, I could watch his thought process in 5 seconds time. Bat, dart brother, dart bat, dart hit, no hesitation. Please keep metal bats away from him, aha. Those hurt so bad. Speaking from experience. I have 3 sons, 8, 23 and 26. The middle one, Andrew, boasted to me that he had sex with over 30 chicks on Tinder, and with some of them in my bed. Yeah, Andrew, you're dong. Congrats. Andrew might be a virgin. Had a neighborhood kid babysitting for my little ones after school. She had some other kids over who got into the liquor cabinet. We told her divorced mom, who very indignantly told us we were lying. About a month later her dad comes to the house with a bottle of Kershwasser, alcohol used for cooking fondue, a couple cheap gold necklaces from my wife, a spare key to our house and an old checkbook from a closed bank account. He apologized profusely and I remember him saying, I never thought my kid would be the bad kid in the neighborhood. It was painful to see. It's nice when it turns out they genuinely believed you were lying. At least it's better than them calling you a liar knowing that you aren't lying. My 6-year-old daughter told me to shave that thing off, my goatee. Couple days later I did. I asked her, do you like it? She makes a bit of a face and says, no, I didn't know your chin was so small. Ouch. My husband has a habit of messing with me. As I was stepping into the shower, he threw ice cold water down my back and I let out a shriek. My 18-month-old comes running in from her bedroom, looks me dead in the eye and screams ah in this overly dramatic whinny voice. Then she did it 3 more times. The little crap ran in from the other room to mock me. You're living in heck. Oh man, too many to list. The most recent is when my son shot me with his Nerf gun directly in my eyeball. My eye still hurts a week later. A couple of weeks ago, my other son pooped on the floor. He's 3, and put a donut on top of it to hide it. Your children have a lot in common with my fraternity brothers. Teaching my kid the value of money. We'd give her tuck shop snack money in the day and we later found out she was just giving it away, not understanding the value of money at all. A few long deep conversations where I hate to admit I became a capitalist poster boy later and she starts to understand that money has a value, how hard it can be to get and that it's even harder to keep. Fast forward a few weeks later, we run out of milk and I only have my card and no cash on me. Plus our local shop will only now accept card purchases over £10, so I figure I'll ask my darling angel little girl if I can borrow £1 for milk and put it back tomorrow. Number: no, you can't have my money, daddy. I earned it and you need to learn responsibility. That money doesn't just fall from the sky and you can't just go around giving everything away, as pretty soon you'll have nothing. I suck at parenting. Okay, this is not my kid, but my mom found out she was raising an butthole when we were out baby clothes shopping with my pregnant aunt, whose first baby had died a few days after birth a year or two earlier. And my brother says, what are you buying it clothes for when you don't even know it's going to live? Also not my kid. My brother had a strop tantrum, aged 15, on holiday, and told me he hated me and that he hoped me and my unborn baby would die because he was losing at mini golf. When I realize that she is most happy when she's doing something that pisses someone else off, like biting people, messing with electronics and playing with cat stuff. Just let that one play itself out. She'll learn her lesson. I'll never forget that one redditor who was going bald and his daughter told him, why do always shave the top of your head like that? You look stupid. My 3-year-old was given a small Fisher-Price trampoline for his birthday. It's like 3 feet in diameter. A few months later, we got invited to take him to Sky Zone, which is a giant indoor warehouse that is wall-to-wall trampolines. It's freaking awesome. So my wife turns to my son and says, "Hey buddy, do you want to go to the trampoline place?" Without missing a beat, my kid rolls his eyes at her, jerks his thumb towards the Fisher-Price one, and says, in the most condescending tone a 3-year-old could muster, "I have one." Better than the other way around, where they now hate the one they have. My cousin is refusing to let her mother and her grandmother see her children because they won't buy her a house. She hasn't been gainfully employed for well over a decade. Her husband pays for everything, but he can't afford the house she wants. Her grandmother looked truly heartbroken when she told us, "Wow, your cousin is a real piece of crap. You should inform her about how much of a piece of crap she is." When I was arguing with my 7-year-old and she said she wished she was dead like my miscarried baby. Freaking savage and a brat. Oh my god. He got frustrated one day because my husband's family from Norway was visiting, and his little cousins were speaking too fast for him to understand. French is our kid's primary language, but we're both attempting to teach him English and Norwegian too. He's 3, and since his exposure to it is basically his father and grandmother, his Norwegian and understandably really not that good. He speaks in single words. Basically, he breaks out with this as a response: "You're in France. Learn to speak French. Norway is stupid, and no one cares." I know I shouldn't have, but he sounded so indignant I started laughing. Then he glared at me. "No one likes America either, mommy." And that's when I realized, as much as I tried not to, I was raising a true Parisian. 6-year-old is cackling and playing Star Wars Lego. Never a good sign. So I go in and see what she's doing. She's on the ranker level and purposefully feeding Jaws to the ranker and cackling as she collects the Lego bricks from every sacrifice. I'm raising a monster. Now give her the Sims. For science. My daughter at 4 years of age was doing some drawing at the table. I walk into the lounge and sit down on her tiny foam couch. Without missing a beat or putting her crayons down, she simply says in the sweetest little voice, "That's my couch, daddy. Now frick off." My kid asked me how to get an elephant out of a Safeway bag. "I don't know," she said. "Take the S out of safe and the F out of way." I thought about it for too long and then said, "But there's no F in way." She cackled. LOL, get wrecked. As much as I like reading about everyone's crappy toddlers, I wanna hear some responses from people who have older grown children who are truly crappy people. What does that feel like? Do you blame yourself? When did you realize they are awful? Did you try to correct it? My wife was having a small argument with the lady running the check-in out the airport. My daughter quietly stared the woman down until they made eye contact and then just said, "B." She was only 2. Have you ever seen the movie Overboard? Those are my kids. When my oldest son was 9 years ago, he destroyed my Warhammer 40k Space Marine Army S $2,000 with a BB gun. My second oldest son recently told his teacher that he was being abused because I grounded him from the Xbox One for a week. That was fun. My youngest son constantly torments his older brother and then tries to get him in trouble after he gets annoyed and yells at him. My 4-year-old daughter, my perfect angel, got upset with my wife and bit her. She then said, "Mom, you taste like bacon." Another story. My stepbrother is in butthole, verbally abusive to everyone, including his own parents, obsessed with money and status, has shady overseas accounts, got into debt with local Asian mafia, got into a fight with my father when he was boasting that he was teaching his future stepkids how to behave and respect their elders, and my father quipped back with, "How can you teach them respect when you have no respect for your own mother and father?" Took my 5-year-old to the doctor for a cold fever. We walk in, nurse bends down and asks, "How are you feeling, big guy?" He replies, "Not very good, otherwise I wouldn't be here." I also hated talking to doctors as a child. Feeling like crap doesn't help, especially if you have the doctor that thinks he's hilarious. Come to think of it, I still don't like talking to doctors. I was expecting stories about when people actually knew their kids were going to be adult buttholes. Instead I got a bunch of stories of toddlers being toddlers. Same. My sister's son is always lying to people about how great he is. Always. He tells people he owns this bar or he is going to get this great job. He tells everyone that he takes care of his retired grandmother financially and loans people money to help out. Anything to make people see him as a good guy instead of the user he is. Turns out that he made his GM sign for his car with a $450 payment. Of course he promised to pay but doesn't. She's in a fixed income, so I tried to explain that he needed to help her instead of steal from her. I guess he didn't like hearing that because he started telling everyone lies about me and threatening to beat me and my wife up. I mean, he told everyone he could his stories about us. People close to us know the story and he still tries to stick to his story that he always gives her money. Saying my mom must be lying about him not paying. He my nephew and I've completely written him off. He's such a bad person and I can't understand why he thinks it's okay to behave that way. I guess if you lie for so long you start believing your own bulls. I pay my bills. I'm a grown butt man. Sad. When my 2-year-old went from sweetly snuggling with me to jumping up and running across the room shouting, "No snuggle you." If you've ever wanted your ego destroyed on a daily basis, allow me to recommend Parenthood. Yeah, sometimes my son leans in to kiss my cheek. Sometimes he pokes me in the eye and laughs at me. Toddlers, you never know what you're gonna get. Well, the other day my son raised his own butthole and projectile shat on my wife. Doesn't exactly answer your question, but it was shocking and also hilarious. I really thought this question would be a lot more interesting than these answers. Was anticipating 50-year-old parents giving stories about their grown butt kid in prison who's a SoundCloud rapper, not 3 5-year-olds giving sass. No one wants to admit they raised in butthole, yet there are plenty out there. Well, my son is now 18 and suddenly my smart, intelligent, conversational boy is in butthole young man. I fear he takes after his father. Also, I hope this is just a smelly, annoying phase. He's just starting on that smelly annoying phase called his 20s that every dude goes through. When, at Christmas a few years ago, I took my 5-year-old to all the relatives' houses to visit and get a few gifts they had for her. When we got to the last house, she looked at the blanket and cookies my grandma made for her and said, "OMG, is this IT? Is this everything?" Ugh, and frickin' threw her crap on the floor. Jerk. Oh heck no. I'd have made her take all her other Christmas gifts and personally give them to a needy child. My 3.5-year-old told me she wanted to go to Bergen Town and eat trolls. She also broke my rib when I was 20 weeks pregnant with her, so I don't know why I am surprised. My 5-year-old loves killing stuff on Dragon Quest. They seem like nice kids, but they may be the death of me. Oh boy, do I have stories. We thought my brother was just going through the freshman douchebag phase, but nope. These were all in a span of 4 months. 1. He stole money from my college fund to buy a PS4, and failed to see why he was in trouble because he was planning to pay us back. 2. He gave his friend our garage passcode without telling anyone, and while we were on vacation we got a call from the police saying someone was having a party at our house. 3. After being grounded from incident 2, he made plans with 2 friends to sneak out with all of my dad's beer. He was caught just as he was making his escape. We joke that the only thing he's not a jerk to is the family dog, who he'll love on like it's his job. So I've got chronic asthma and lung issues, which is a daily issue. One day my 10-year daughter asks me to get up from my desk and make her a tea. Naturally, the words of my parents come out of my mouth and I replied with, "What did your last slave die of?" Without skipping a beat she replies, "Asthma." At that time I became deeply conflicted between my urge to beat her stupid and how proud I was of her. I knew my younger brother was a butthole when he was talking about a kid at school that no one liked, and how he'd tried to sit with him and his friends at lunch. Me. He probably has trouble making friends. You should be nice to him. But he's annoying. We just ignore him. Me. How would you feel if the other kids ignored you? Treat him how you want others to treat you. Number. Chinese food delivery girl. We meet again. Tell your brother he's in butthole, and I want prawn crackers with my meal this time. Lots of new-ish parents who still haven't worked out that raising a child is explicitly the process of turning a sociopath who thinks they're literally God into a well-rounded human. Come back and tell your stories when the kid is old enough to steal a car. Then we'll find out how you did. Trick question. If the kid is truly in butthole, 90% of the time, the parents are too. So they don't even realize it, or don't give a frick, because they are buttholes. Can confirm. My childhood best friend's mom taught her to hurl insults at her so they could go back and forth for funsies. My mom told her to stop calling her mom a cow after her stepdad got thrown out for relapse. But come to find out her mom straight up taught her to be a Beelmeo. I run a tight ship at home. The house is always tidy. Kids know to put a toy back before getting out another one. They use their manners, etc. We go to our friend's house for a party. Her house is chaotic at the best of times and always untidy. Nothing awful, but very untidy. I find it hard sitting in mess, but she's my friend and I need adult conversation. My 8-year-old son walks in, surveys the room and says in the most patronizing voice, "Hey babe, you've really got to tidy up." All the adults are doubled over laughing. The birthday boy's dad is slow clapping, while grinning at his mortified wife. My son then proceeds to tell his captive audience how he has his own Hoover and has to clean all the time at home. "I'm a stay-at-home mum. I do all the cleaning and the Hoover is mine. My husband and 2 kids do not lift a finger and come home to tea on the table every night. Floor swallow me whole please." That kid needs to get called on his BS. My son wrote a very carefully worded Father's Day card. I was sitting there marveling at how much he loved me, till I realized the left side of the paragraph spelled something. Get REKT was the first letter of each line. It must have taken him a week to figure that out. I now realize letting him play online games since he was 9 was not a good idea. I was getting ready to go on a date and I'm fixing my hair and whatnot. My son comes in, no amount of love is going to fix that hairline, then walks away. I stood there for a second. You little crap. My 4-month-old decided that his new favorite morning entertainment, he wakes up at dawn, is to smack his sleeping father over and over in the face while giggling about it. He does it for about half an hour every morning. I don't need to wake up until 8, but now I can't get back to sleep. He may have gotten my butthole genes but not my ADD. I'd get bored after 2 minutes if I were him. Time for someone to be sleeping in their own crib. LOL. Not my kid, but I feel for the dad on this. Worked at Starbucks at an airport one summer. Had a tubby dad and his 4-year-oldish looking daughter order drinks. He was very jokey and they were nice enough. Then he goes to her dad is gonna get a muffin. "Do you want anything to eat?" This ruthless kid just turns to look at him and goes, "No daddy, you're too fat for the muffin. You don't need it." Ouch. She turns and points at me. "Your boobs are bigger than this lady's. Thanks kid." I babysit one. His parents are hippie peaceful type people yet raised a selfish T. He always needs to be and have the biggest, the best, the most and is obsessed with sharps things weapons fighting, and yet is a total P himself. If he so much as bumps his knee he screams and cries. To be fair, he is only 5 and all kids are like this to an extent and it is something they grow out of. But I work with lots of kids and he is especially in butthole. If someone says they like or made something, he will instantly try to destroy it or take it. If I tell him I hurt my foot the other day so to be careful, he tries to stomp on it. When I asked him what his favorite part of Toy Story was, when Woody pushed Buzz out the window, it is hard taking him to the playground because he gets in little kids' faces for no reason and threatens them with a stick. So embarrassing. I feel like my mother would fit perfectly on Gis list. My 3 younger brothers have recently all been arrested, one for drug issues, one for vandalism and the youngest for setting an entire school building on fire. She abused us endlessly. I got out and lived with my dad. I haven't seen any of them since my kids were born. But she still can't understand why her sons ARW assholes. When back for break I had learned my younger brother, age 17, let his friends frick in my room while I was at college, the used condom still in my room. He asked for a ride which I said no because I had just driven a long way, to which he responds by insulting me, claims I'm not being mean. I'm just saying what others won't say to your face, which has led me to realize whenever I talk to him he either wants something or wants to fight. When I talked to my mom about it, she said she can't be more strict because he is adopted and doesn't want to treat him differently than my biological sister and I. If she really wanted to be equal she would not deal with his balls. Only plus side of going home is I now have a lock on my bedroom door. Wife texted me to tell me our 8-year-old, I'm actually a stepfather, shoved her this morning after I left for work. So I don't know if we've raised in butthole yet, but he's going to know what one is when I get home. My dad told me today that during Prohibition in the 20s, my grandma was a truck driver and to make ends meet she transported booze to the local speakeasies from the moonshiners. What's the most bad butt thing your grandparents have done? My grandpa was a pilot in World War II. During the war he shot and destroyed a German submarine. Turns out that some of those Germans survived that attack, and in the late 90s my grandpa traveled to Germany and met one of them. They had tea. Correction, he was actually a navigator on a B-24. I thought the story would end with him finishing the job, but tea is nice, too. My grandpa went in for a physical for the World War II draft and was laughed out of the doctor's office for being too tall. You think we have uniforms to fit you? He is 6'8". He was a minor league baseball player and struck out Satchel Paige. Had a tryout with the White Sox and the Braves, but his mom wouldn't let him go. Learned to use the internet at the age of 85. When he was 87 his wife died and he learned to cook. He mailed me a strawberry rhubarb pie to my dorm room at school when he was 89 and had just learned to bake pies. It was delicious. A few weeks ago, my dad took him to visit an assisted living facility and he turned it down because he didn't want to live in a den of elderly people. He is 92 and still going strong. I think your grandpa is cutting onions near where I'm. My grandfather lied about his age to be able to join the Navy in World War II. He survived 2 shipwrecks, once spending a night in the ocean surrounded by sharks and Japanese planes dropping bombs before he was finally rescued. Both grandfathers were in World War II. One got 2 Purple Hearts. The other didn't see combat, but he was one of the guys who had to write the letters to the families of those that weren't coming home. When he returned, he told my grandmother, "Never ask me to attend a funeral, ever," and she never did. Always thought that was awesome how respectful of his wishes she was until his last days. My great grandpa got his middle finger shot off in World War II when he was smoking at night. My grandmother was tiny, very elegant, very well spoken and had perfect manners. She whizzed around London during the Blitz in a converted horse box that was a makeshift ambulance. Messed up her eyesight because all she could see out of was a small slit to avoid any light getting out. Yep, my impeccable grandmother was awesome. Swiss grandmother worked in the Red Cross. Go World War II nurse grandmothers. My grandmother was a teacher in North Korea before the war. She taught Japanese. Once the war started, the communists targeted the educated, such as teachers. She ran barefoot for miles and miles until she safely crossed the border, then beating my grandfather who was running from the war as well. He was targeted too because he ran away from serving in the North Korean military. Impending our Pyongyang ban. I bet they are really glad they made that decision. My granddad was a butcher in Scotland and owned one of the most popular shops in the city. The line often went outside of the shop, so people had to wait outside. One day a guy stole a woman's handbag outside of his shop. My granddad immediately ran outside and chased after him. When he caught up to him and tackled him to the ground, the robber had terror in his face and immediately gave the bag back and ran away. My granddad couldn't figure out why he was so scared until he looked down at his hand. The entire time he had been chasing this guy, he had a meat cleaver in his hand. My grandpa, coming from an extremely Italian family, just recently told me a story about when he was younger and worked on his father's farm, living near the city, NYC I believe. They'd take their crops into the market and sell them for profit money for the fam. The mafia got word that my grandpa's father's farm was doing very well and eventually a member came to the farm demanding a cut of the profit or else he'll have the farm burned down and everyone killed. He told them he'd be back with a couple other members to collect the cash in about a week. As the week passes and the crops were sold, the mafia members finally come to collect the profit. The mafia members were not aware that my grandpa, great-grandpa, and great-uncle were waiting with guns drawn for the members to arrive. When they finally did arrive, they opened fire, killing every member who came to collect the money. To hide the bodies, they buried them in one of the farm's ponds. TLDR. Grandpa was a farmer, sold crops. Mafia wanted cut of profit, but instead, Grandpa and company massacred the mafia members, hid the bodies and got away with it. Normally the mob doesn't let people get away with stuff like that. I'm glad your relatives were fortunate enough to fight off those gangsters. My grandpa was a nationalist activist in China when the communists were taking over. He and my grandma were about to escape to Taiwan, but right before they boarded the ship, the communist activists attacked the area, and he lost grandma in the commotion. He could have gotten on that ship, which was just departing, but he wasn't about to leave to Taiwan without my pregnant grandmother. He didn't board, and was immediately captured. He spent months in prison, tortured daily for names of his comrades. He was never killed because he was a trained surgeon and the communist army needed somebody with medical skills, so he would alternate between tending to his enemies and being tortured. He began sharpening his copper buttons on the prison floor, and one day when he managed to sharpen them enough, he slit his wrists and arteries off his neck. While he was bleeding to death, he was discovered and recovered, only to be tortured some more. He later was released and reunited with my grandmother. He also faced a lot of discrimination after that for having a nationalist background. He passed away 3 years ago. When I was little, I would trace his faint scars on his wrists and neck and ask him about it. I asked him how he could offer medical assistance to enemies who tortured him. He said no matter who it is, heal the wounded and rescue the dying. I am a doctor. He is one of the strongest men I know. Man, that quote hit me really hard. IDKY. ZMY honorary grandfather, who was my real grandfather's best friend, is a gay man and he loved my grandfather his entire life. My grandfather was married and straight, but he never stopped being best friends with him, and I'm pretty sure he knew that his friend was not going to ever get married. For his entire life this man stayed best friends with my grandfather, and when my grandfather died, this man was there as always. I'm not saying this is anything super heroic or badass, but this is the sweetest and most quiet man I know, and the most faithful man alive. And my grandfather was not the easiest man in the world to be best friends with. So anyways, I think his whole life was both tragic and heroic at once. And he's still not admitted to world that he's gay, and probably never will. Upvote for a different definition of badass. Well, my great uncle worked as muscle for the Kray twins, infamous London gangsters. He moved from Ireland when he was about 15-16. Worked in the construction industry for a while until one day when he was in a pub with his mates and a well-dressed man in a whistle and flute walked up and asked the boys if they wanted to make a bit of cash. They said okay and he handed them each £50, which was a frick ton of money back in the day. The geezer tells them to be at the pub at the same time the next night. So, they show up and a big butt trunk pulls up and they all pile in. The gent is sitting in the back with them and tells them that they're going to a pool hall and their job is to wreck the place. The lads don't know what to make of this, but cash is cash, so they go along with it. The truck stops and they're told that there's bats and crap in the boot. They grab them, rush into the hall and start to smash the crap out of tables, the bar and pretty much everything and everyone. When they finish, they get driven back to the pub with an extra 50 quid each. This kinda pattern went on for a few years. Small jobs that didn't really require much brain, mostly brawn. They also got access to the Cray Twins bar or something. At one stage my uncle was almost arrested because he resembled the twins' chief executioner. He only got away because he had the letters from his dear old mammy back home in Ireland to prove that it wasn't him. TLDR. Uncle was a thug in London. Looking back now, it don't seem very bad but seems more douchy. But hey, it's a good story. Not everyone's relatives can be heroes. I am often told I am descended horse thieves. I guess my mom's side of the family doesn't have a lot to be proud of. My granddad, my mother's father, as is important, as a Garda in Ireland, protected the British embassy when a mob of people came to burn it down after Bloody Sunday in 1972. The twist being my father, who had yet to meet my maternal grandfather, was in the mob trying to burn it down. My granddad had this to say about the whole thing. An empty building for the lives of 14 people was a poor deal. My granddad punched a man through a shed wall who pointed a gun at him when he was working in the Palestine police. He knocked his front 2 teeth out on the recoil on a machine gun while gunning down some Huns in World War II. When 74, he made a 30-something guy road rage and the dude started screaming through the driver's side window at him. Cool as a button, he just opened his door very fast into the guy's face and put him down. He has loads of medals for boxing in the army, seems he was pretty dang good at it when he was a PT instructor. He made a fair bit of money in his time and blew it on dog racing and drinking. He won £100,000 on the premium bonds in his late 70s and bought a fricking boat. When I knew him as a child, he smiled a lot, always had time to chat with you, and I never once in the 22 years I knew him heard him raise his voice. R.I.P. Fred, I wish I knew thee better. Freaking boats are also better than abstinence boats. My granddad was a pilot in World War II. When he came back, instead of going to church on Sundays, he would ride around his small crop duster underneath all the bridges in town, making a general racket and not giving men a fricks, if any at all. He was a G. That's so cool. My paternal great-grandfather worked as the Capone family's personal bartender during Prohibition, and he sold it while my maternal great-grandfather brewed it. They met at my parents' wedding over 60 years later. My grandfather was a revolutionary in Bangladesh. When they were fighting for their independence, he was always on the run because he was a primary target. Anyway, the one story that sticks out is when he jumped off a 3-story building, broke his leg and still kept running limping from the military. Oh, and he's been to prison a few times for refusing to renounce his language, Bangla, and speak Urdu. I honestly wish I knew more details, but my grandpa was an advocate for Ziaur Rahman at the time, more in the political side, and grandpa's brother was a prisoner of war for being a spy. Nobody talks about his time in jail though. My mom and her sister have shrapnel scars from some bombing during the time as well. My grandfather and grandmother were communists in German-occupied Europe. My grandfather once told me of how they helped Jews hide from the Germans and how they helped spread resistance newspapers pamphlets. My great-grandparents did the same in Holland. My great-granddad was a peat farmer and would hide Jews in the peat fields. Got taken away by the Gestapo 3 times, came back every time, then fled to Australia. My grandparents have been married over 60 years, and in failing health they are still able to love and look after each other. My grandfather genuinely loved his wife, and never cheated on her or even wanted any other woman. I hear so many Mad Men type stories from that generation. So much pain. Proud to say he was one of the good ones. Same with my grandfather. Seemed after his wife died that he just had up. He left us yesterday. My grandmother is 96 and grew up in Texas. She didn't do anything badass, but she is badass. I once saw a guy shooting at a car outside of my window. It kind of shook me, I have to be honest. I thought I would blow her mind with this story. Her response: "That reminds me of the time I saw a man get shot. Reminds me of the other time I saw a man shot to death in the face." She repeatedly reminds me of her badassery. I remember it because it was a great day. Our family had an orange for dessert. Grew up in Texas during the Depression. Badass. Love your G. My grandfather was a fighter pilot in World War II. His plane was shot and he had to bail. As he was abandoning the plane, he pulled the parachute cord, but the door on his plane caught his leg. He lost half his leg as the parachute pulled him up and the plane pulled his leg down. He landed somewhere in Italy and had to go into hiding until he was rescued. Pretty bad bus in my mind. My great uncle served in World War II, Korea and Vietnam. In Vietnam he got shot in the head and survived. He had to have a metal plate in his head, but he lived a long time. My grandmother worked as ticket taker on a streetcar in Nazi-occupied Norway. She kicked a fully armed Nazi soldier off the streetcar for refusing to pay. She physically removed him. Single-handedly held off several Japanese soldiers with a machine gun, while the rest of his squad retreated. He got a medal for it. I can't remember which one. My grandmother told her parents that she was in student government or something, but really she got a job filling bombs in a factory during World War II. Lied to the factory about only being 15 too. My grandfather's favorite story about her. In the 60s in Mississippi, she held a door for a black man as she was leaving a building and he was going in. Some white guy told her she shouldn't do that and she just looked him right in the eye and said, "I will do whatever I goddamn please, especially if it pisses off buttholes like you." After my great grandmother died, both her husband and her ex, her children's father, died long ago. My grandmother and her sisters went through her house to sort out the belongings. They found numerous order forms and request letters for whiskey, wine, moonshine, ect along with wads of cash with them. Granny was astounded that her sweet old grandpa was the area's best bootlegger during the Prohibition. A few years ago my grandma went skydiving. Her first chute didn't open. In a few weeks she is taking me whitewater rafting. She's 76. He wasn't my grandpa but an older man I knew was in World War II and he had some bad butt stories. Dropped behind enemy positions and shelled them on D-Day. Hid in the basement of a Nazi outpost and survived by eating bats. Eventually grabbed one of the girls who came down periodically for supplies and made her divulge information and get them out of there. Escaped from a POW camp on Christmas Day by running for a break in the fence during drills. Got shot at it for nearly 2 miles before he made away. Escaped from a prison hospital by jumping out of a second-story window and stealing a German car. Swung around the corner of a building to a German with a MP40. Quickly hit him with the butt of his Tommy gun, knocking him out. He then interrogated the guy and got him to defect. I remember I interviewed him for a school project and he gave me some stuff to show to the class. An artillery shell from D-Day, a Nazi field marshal helmet and a Hitler Youth knife. Yeah, I had the best presentation. I was told that in World War II the government was sending horse meat from my grandpa's dog food company to the soldiers. The story is that he switched the horse meat out for high quality beef when he could. My mother was born and raised in Turkey on a military base, US base. Blue jeans were illegal in Turkey at the time, and marijuana was hard to get on the base. My mom, being the crafty teenager she was, became a dealer. She sold American blue jeans to Turks and marijuana to Americans. Blue jeans were illegal in Turkey. The frick. But yeah, your mom is cool. My grandfather and my great-grandfather and great-grandmother were major leaders in the labor movement of the first half of the 20th century. We got my grandpa's FBI file when he died. It was 3 inches thick. My grandma was attacked in the Cultural Revolution. She was the principal of a high school in Beijing. She's also suffered a lot of loss through the deaths of her siblings. I think the fact that she has no resentment and is still so gentle, lovely and patient makes her pretty badass. Also, my grandpa learned Russian in a couple of months and wrote his thesis in Russian. This was when the USSR and China were still friends. I find that pretty badass too. My grandmother left my grandfather with the 4 kids. Just freaking left and didn't come back for 3 months. People didn't do that in the early 60s. It was enough to teach him his lesson, and when she came back their relationship was much more solid. I found out yesterday that my grandpa designed and built radio jammers for B-52s in the 60s. Once, He flipped one on just to see if it worked, and it knocked out every TV station in the city instantly. Oh dear, I'm too late to the thread. Anyway, my grandma was an activist in the South during the time when integration was kicking off. As a teen, she would steal the white and colored signs off the bus and hide them under her house. When integration finally reached the public schools, and black kids were allowed into the previously all-white schools, most of the white families pulled their kids out of school. The ones who stayed were assaulted and stoned on their way to school. My grandma was one of many volunteers who helped drive and escort them to school so they wouldn't be hurt. She would tell me how sorry she felt for Ruby Bridges, who was all alone at school, and how she wanted so badly to give her a hug. She recently met Ruby and got a hug. When he was 16, my Yiddish grandfather lied about his age and enlisted in the Marines so that he could fight in World War II. He was first stationed in Shanghai to help Jewish refugees. After Shanghai, he was sent to combat in Europe. While there, he was injured when some shrapnel from an explosion embedded itself in the back of his neck, leg, and knee. My other grandpa was in the Navy stationed off of Asia's coast. My dad is 76, so I think this applies. He lived in communist Hungary until the revolution of 1956, when he escaped to Austria and then England in the middle of the night with absolutely nothing. In England, he applied for college and a scholarship as a refugee. The organization that would grant him a scholarship wanted him to wait a year to learn English before going to a college. He didn't speak it at all, but he fought tooth and nail with them. They ended up giving him a train ticket, which he had no idea where it was to. He went down to the train station, asked a conductor for help, ended up getting on the right train, and ended up in Scotland, where he studied at St. Andrews and got a degree in chemistry. I think that's pretty badass in itself. From there he immigrated to the United States, got a PhD in chemistry, got a degree in medicine, and became a doctor. The fact that he did this all starting from literally nothing amazes me. Man, he has so many crazy and awesome stories. My grandparents smuggled tens of thousands of US dollars into East Germany, where they were traded on the black market, resulting in the passage for hundreds of people into West Germany. As a policeman, my grandfather caught 2 murderers and a few mafia members. He once used my 8-year-old dad to trail a suspect. My grandfather worked, indirectly, with Gandhi in helping India gain independence from England. He's the only member of my family, to my knowledge, to be arrested for any reason. Killed a bunch of Nazis. We never could get much out of him, until the Alzheimer's got bad. But yeah, lots of Nazi killing. My grandfather told me that when he was young his brother used to cry all the time, and when he cried he was always looking up with his mouth open. One day my grandpa was on the balcony of his house and his brother started crying right underneath it. So my grandpa decided to pee on him to make it stop. Don't know if this is bad, but it made me laugh for days when he told me. Another story related to the Second World War. My grandpa in fascist Italy received the call for the army. However, because he hated the fascists and believed that war was stupid, he ran away and hid in the mountain. There he studied and immediately after the war got his degree. This meant that he was one of the few people qualified to teach Italian in my town. He got a place in the local high school and he worked there until retirement. Again, don't know if this is bad, but I'm so proud of him. Grandpa, rest in peace, you will be my hero forever. My grandpa drove home from a nightclub in LA, a nightclub in the 30s, in the car of the most dangerous mobster around. The mistake occurred because they had the same car, but the car my grandpa drove home that night had a plethora of guns in the trunk. My Grammy burnt her eyebrows off with fire batons when she was younger. It used to scare the crap out of me when I would see her in the morning before she penciled them on. She always looked so surprised. My grandmother sent her father to jail. She was 8 and he was making moonshine of rural Ohio, and the police came and asked her where her daddy was and she said, out back making moonshine. It'll take you to him. She took their hands and led them to the backwoods where he was promptly arrested and went to jail for 5 years. TLDR. My grandma is a snitch. Grandpa was a Peace Corps administrator, civil rights activist, and, later, an openly gay man in a hostile political and social climate, and of course an activist for gay rights. Marched with MLK Jr., negotiated with warlords in Niger, served in Korea only to later oppose the war in Vietnam. He was the best. What are some truths some parents refuse to accept? There's a time when you need to let your kids make mistakes, so they can learn from them. Life is pretty short, so if they have a goal, let them go for it. And meet those mistakes with dialogue, conversation, understanding, and help, not blind rage, shouting, punishment, or hostility. That sometimes their kids have valid opinions, and instead of interrupting them and pulling the "because I said so and that's just how it is" cards, they could listen to their child and make them feel heard instead of suppressed. Your child's mental health doesn't care about your worries of looking like a bad parent. If you get them help, it will continue to get worse the longer you neglect them. And that you are a bad parent if you do not get your child the help they need and deserve. You as a parent are responsible for teaching your kids proper manners and common decency, not their teachers, tutors, babysitters, etc. I briefly worked as a Japanese teacher, and I was surprised at how little some of these parents were involved in their kids' lives and expected me to address all their problems during the short few hours I had them for the week. That you are responsible for your kids. Yes, you need to feed them, clothe them, provide shelter, love them, etc. It's amazing how many parents don't want to do some of those or feel like it's a burden to do those. Like, they wanted you to exist, you didn't even choose to live, so they should either be responsible or not a parent. Their children have their own hopes and dreams, their own beliefs. A very good friend is leading an entirely second life to keep her mother from controlling her or belittling her decisions. It's very stressful to not encourage their children to find themselves. Oof, I led an entirely second life for years. It was hard, but not as hard as dealing with my mom's reaction to me being who I am. I kept it up until I had kids and physically couldn't anymore without putting them in a yucky situation. There's been a huge falling out, but I moved across the country and am really enjoying life. I hope not to repeat the pattern. Apologizing won't kill you. It's better to be respected than feared. Your kids can have different opinions than you. You can be a parent and a friend. Would be great if my dad apologized for something. Hasn't done that in years. If your kid needs help, speech therapy, tutoring, medication, occupational therapy, ACT, it is not a reflection on you personally. Sometimes kids struggle. That's okay. Making sure your kid has all the tools they need to succeed is your responsibility as a parent. I worked in a charity for people who had attempted suicide. One parent was highly in denial and claimed that her kid confused her sleeping pills with candy and got sick. Twice. Once in elementary school and again in high school. That some kids can't help them with some of their struggles, hardships, and that some kids have depression and it may not be a phase. I feel like the signs of depression and other mental illnesses in kids needs to be talked about more. I didn't get treatment until my 30s and thought it was just something I had been suffering from for a few years. Looking back, I've had anxiety and depression pretty much my entire life and I had absolutely no idea. The signs were there, but I can see why my parents missed them. Your kid is an individual. There is a good chance that their interests, hobbies, and passions are going to be different from yours. Support and encourage your kids to be themselves and not a mini you. Also, for the love of God, have a conversation about how you and your partner plan on raising your kid. My parents had such drastically different and bad in their own ways parenting styles. It was really confusing. Reading this thread made me want to share a quote I heard a long time ago. When they are little, treat the small things like big things, because if you don't, when they are older, they won't share the big things with you. The small things are big to them, can't remember. Reading this thread made me realize how freaking awesome my parents are and how freaking lucky I am. That your children may turn out completely different to you. Different interests, different hobbies, different ideologies, different religions. Don't get pissy at your kid because he likes reading instead of football. Or if your kid likes football and not reading. 1. That we aren't always going to be your baby. 2. You are not always right. 3. Sometimes we don't tell you the full truth for a reason, like it backfiring on us and making the whole situation worse for us in every way, shape and form. Your kid doesn't ever really belong to you. They are just another human who has their own life. You're just responsible for helping them figure out life. That when kids grow up, they will enjoy spending time with you if you treat them like a friend. They will not enjoy spending time with you if you continue to act like an authority figure or someone who knows better. The reward for good parenting is a friendship with your adult child. Some parents need to accept that a whole day of shopping with the little kid isn't realistic, and that instead, you just need to do what you can and take them home if they're screaming and crying, especially if they're little. Little kids especially have a limit. They won't be able to handle a full day of shopping for a while. Don't push the kid to the point of screeching, screaming, and crying and expect them to continue. It makes them, you and everybody else miserable. TLDR. Just take your kid home when they're tired. Little kids, baby, early elementary age, have a timer. It usually lasts about 3/4 of a restaurant meal with the family, 2 stores at the mall, or half a boring errand, DMV, medical appointment, car repair, etc. Plan accordingly. An easy way to get your child to start lying to you is by accusing them of lying when your kid is telling you the truth. Kid says something that is true. Parent, stop lying. Kid repeats the same true statement. Parent, I told you to stop lying. Kid now tells a lie the parent wants to hear. Parent, there, doesn't it feel good to tell the truth? However, since you were lying earlier, I am going to punish you. That they are the ones who demanded participation trophies, not their kids. They just don't want anyone else's kid to get one. My mom has several participation trophies from the 1960s. That their children are dickheads. Oh no, my James would never do something like that. Well, he did, and he's a prick. Spoiling your kid too much can leave them really unprepared for the real world. They can end up really useless, or a complete butthole who genuinely thinks the world revolves around them. At some point you need to teach them they aren't king queen of the world. They need to fend for themselves eventually. You can either raise you kids and spoil your grandkids, or spoil your kids and raise your grandkids. That there comes a point where your kids grow up and you will start to see them as peers, sharing stories that are vulnerable, asking for advice. But once you do that, you're not the boss of them anymore. You can't talk about your bad sex life with your adult kid while also ripping on them for not finishing college or whatever. This one thing my parents did. Pretty strict growing up where and when they needed to be. After turning 18 they pretty much stopped enforcing rules on me and just kinda let me do my own thing. It was weird seeing my dad going from this hardest on rules to pretty much wanting to be my buddy. Just because you did your best does not mean it wasn't still bad and or a traumatic childhood. Source: 26-year-old mom that hates I go to therapy because she did her best. That thing aren't the same as they were when they grew up. I'm so tired of explaining to my boomer parents that I'm not wasting my money on a luxury apartment. $1,800/month is the new norm for where I live. I have an average apartment and am paying average rent. They somehow don't realize that rent is no longer $600 a month. ADHD is a real thing. I mentioned to a co-worker my ADHD and he was like, nah, that's not real. A doctor tried to tell me my son has it and I was like, no. Paraphrased. I couldn't get into it at the time, but I wish I could have. It's absolutely real and crippling if you don't know how to manage it. Crap, even with meds and therapy it's crippling sometimes. I'm sorry little dude. I hope your dad comes around and accepts it one day. That poor kid. Sex education is a good thing. Even today, there are parents out here who refuse to have the talk with their kids. If they do, there's a great deal of fear, shame, and religious dogma thrown into the mix. The talk is awkward for both parties, but in the end everybody's better off for it. Teenage girls have real and valid emotions. They're not just on their period every time they're upset. They're not inherently harder to raise than teenage boys. They're not just because their body is changing, because they have male friends, or because they are wearing a tank top. That giving them attention is actually good for them and not bad. Kids need affection and to be shown they are important, and that does not mean they are being spoiled. Adding on, No amount of hugs growing up guarantees they'll want to be hugged as they get older. As heartbreaking as it can feel as a parent, a 12-year-old might not want to give you a hug ever. It doesn't mean they don't love you. It means they show affection in a different way. You are not raising kids, you are raising the adult they are going to be. Stop letting them do butthole things and excusing it because it's cute, and they're just being kids. No, you're teaching them that those things are okay. They have no concept of this is only cute because I'm 5. They just think it's okay. Parents seem to forget that a ton of learning to be a human is imitation, trial and error, and figuring it out by trying. It's like they think if I did not explicitly teach them to do or not do that thing, then they did not learn the thing. Oh, they learned. They're watching you, testing you, pushing limits, learning. You have to treat every situation with at least a dash of, will just letting this one go teach them a lesson that's going to be heck to you and teach? I know you don't want your kid to be disrespectful to you, but if you accuse your child of being disrespectful, but your child was not intentionally being disrespectful to you, your child may decide to intentionally be disrespectful to you in the future. Example, if you accuse your kid of swearing and your kid wasn't swearing, all of your plans for how you will raise your child and how they will turn out are garbage. Nothing will come close to your plans and dreams, because they are yours, not the kids. If you decide to have more kids, basing how they will behave or act and what they will do on the earlier kid is also garbage. Even if they're twins, they're individuals with their own personalities. That your kid could come out as gay no matter how you bring them up. If you aren't willing to accept, and I use this term lightly, that risk, and you see abandonment or violence as an appropriate response, maybe it's best you don't have children. That it's their responsibility to raise the child, as they decided to have them and have to accept the things you need to do to properly raise them. It's not the child's fault that they are there. They didn't have a choice. The parents did. Being a parent doesn't make you an expert at everything. During college I was in a class where everyone else was a middle-aged mom. Whenever I said anything that contradicted them I was told I didn't know anything because I didn't have kids. Once I told one of them she was annoying for always bringing up her kids as if that was gonna change the facts, and she dead but replied, annoying? You don't know anything about annoying. I have 3 kids. Come back to me when you've dealt with 3 toddlers and then we can talk about annoying. I can't make this crap up. My mother was like, she thought having a kid somehow gave her mystical powers and she was always right about everything and somehow knew everything. It was annoying to deal with. Just because you bathed me, clothed me and saw me naked as a baby toddler does not mean you have the right to barge in when I'm in the middle of a shower or getting ready after a shower. Their children are people who need privacy just like they do. I don't understand this. By the time my kids were like 5 I always knocked, etc. It teaches them boundaries and respect for each other's privacy and space. That if you abused their kids you abused them. You can't go back and say, oh I don't remember doing that, it wasn't that bad, to a traumatic memory a child, grown or not, has brought back up because that memory never freaking left them. The axe forgets but the tree remembers. You cannot really control a person who's older and realized how much agency they have. Financial dependency is one thing that might stop young adults from disobeying their parents, but at the end of the day you can't be forced to do anything you don't want to. Some parents think they can control every aspect of their kid's life, and pushing for that is exactly what results in kids leaving the second they can. That they were abusive or neglectful even if they didn't mean to be, and that they should have gone to therapy instead of having kids for validation. I wish parents would more often acknowledge their flaws and mistakes in their parenting, but the same people that are vocal about children needing to get over it because they are now adults are probably terrible parents anyways. It is incredibly fricked up to have a kid in hopes it will make one or both parents straighten up and fly right. Don't give your kid the crappy task of saving you or your partner before they are even born. Raising your kid doesn't make you a superhero, goddess, badass, or anything else but a parent. I understand parenting is rough and we have no social safety net, but I'm not all that impressed by people who choose parenthood and constantly want headbutts for it. Some people just don't like physical affection. If your child doesn't like being hugged and or kissed, chances are they won't suddenly love it when they're older. No, I did not break up the family by going no contact. You broke it yourself when you started abusing me and accusing me of being responsible for everything that you are not happy with. Oh, I got this one too. Along with I'm sorry you feel that way. Not I'm sorry for my actions causing you to have anxiety and depression and ongoing nightmares about the abuse. I hate Christmas because it's so family centric and mine are buttholes. Still better than being in contact and getting more abuse though. 1. Most children don't just cut their parents out of their life for no good reason. When that happens, the parents have either fricked up big time or have been treating their child poorly for years. Sincerely, a 28-year-old woman who hasn't talked to her mother for 2.5 years. 2. Parents need to understand and accept that their child is an individual with their own unique personality, needs, interests and goals before the child is born. If a potential parent can't accept a child as being different than what they wanted or expected, they are not ready to have a child. That your parents messed you up in ways they didn't see coming. Their parents did the same to them, and you will do the same to your kids. That having intelligent children does not mean they are obligated to use that intelligence if it doesn't make them happy. Doing the basic things for your child, taking them to the dentist, buying them clothes, feeding them isn't something that the child needs to repay later in life. Those are just the basic things you need to do because they are your responsibility. My mom is a preschool teacher, and almost every year she has at least one kid with something going on mentally, developmentally, ADHD, autism, sometimes even more severe issues. She's learned to identify it based on how developed the kid is when they first come to her class, and how they progress, as well as years of experience seeing both neurotypical kids and diagnosed neurodivergent ones. More often than not, the parents of the ones who haven't already been diagnosed are in full denial. My mom is not allowed to straight up say I think your kid is autistic, because she's not a medical professional, but she is allowed to suggest the kid is developmentally different and that they should get tested for X, Y, and Z. Who their kids are, and I don't just mean if they are gay, trans, etc. Just in general really. Prime example for me had always been that my parents were so geeked up on the idea of me being a lawyer, then a business owner. When I went into business in college, I even used to try and write stories and they swore I'd be the next big writing, instead of accepting, like a majority of other kids. I had no clue. I was and still am trying to figure life and crap out, but mainly that I am okay, just making a steady living, having a small bit decent sized 1-bedroom apartment. I'm not on drugs, don't have kids, no string, not bad relationships, and I'm still finding my path. But yay, for my parents they could never accept that, and would get critical as heck over any choice or time I expressed liking something that didn't align with their vision of my greatness. My 5-year-old daughter was playing My Little Ponies when I heard her say, I'm Slurms Mackenzie, the original party worm parents of Reddit. What weird things have your kids done that made you proud? My husband's mom told my 4-year-old son he sounds like a girl, before I could verbally slap her. My 6-year-old daughter jumps in, no disrespect ma'am, but sounds like himself, not a girl. He's 4 and that was mean. That's my girl. When my oldest daughter was about 7 we lived in this 2-story house. One night, after bedtime for her younger siblings and quiet in your room time for her, I heard her making a little too much noise, so I go upstairs to tell her to be quieter or she'd have to go to bed too, because I didn't want her waking up the baby. I open her door and she leaps away from her night table, puts her hands behind her back and starts looking very, very guilty. Confused, I look at her night table to see what she'd been up to. On her night table is a Barbie doll, naked, arms and legs akimbo. Colorful pipe cleaners were wrapped around the helpless Barbie's arms and legs, and led to several other odds and ends toys on her night table. I look from this odd setup to my daughter, then back. My daughter shuffles her feet, looking guiltily down at the floor and says, "What? I was only being a mad scientist." I can't help it. I start laughing, and I'm now being way louder than she was before, so I can't really chastise her for noise. So I back out of her room and head toward the stairs to tell my wife. I'm about halfway down the stairs when suddenly I hear her. I lost it. Nearly fell down the stairs. I was laughing so hard. For years she held to the idea that when she grew up she was going to be a mad scientist. As someone who was once a little girl who dreamed of becoming a mad scientist, I applaud your reaction. My 5-year-old son pretends he's the narrator of How It's Made while he's playing Legos, complete with the intro today on how it's made. Earlier this year, my 2-year-old was at an Easter egg hunt at the zoo. It was just empty plastic eggshells, but a lot of those toddlers were freaking vicious. Anyways, my daughter kept picking up eggs and giving them to all the other kids the entire time. What a gal. My 4-year-old son likes to build elaborate scenes on Little Big Planet, just to blow everything up. I'm either proud or worried. I'll let you know in 10 years or so. I just got a flashback to my greatest triumph in SimCity. I balanced the budget, then got bored when people rioted over taxes one time too many. You know what? Try rioting with a volcano, aliens, and an earthquake on the Lamadome M. My 4-year-old will sit next to his little sister, 1.5, and ask her if she wants to hear a story. If she keeps looking at him, he begins with Once Upon a Time, and then he launches into his latest exploits on Mario 64 or Zelda, Spirit Tracks. He goes into detail about the monsters he can't get past and how his trains keep getting blown up. It's freaking adorable. He really wants his little sis to be in on it. He's an awesome big brother. Screw it. I want a child now. My 1-2-year-old daughter is obsessed with Star Wars. She has wall stickers that she must kiss goodnight. She absolutely loves to dress up and then fight around the house with lightsabers, and she has tea parties with Chewie and R2-D2. She also sleeps with her stuffed Totoro and C-3PO every night. She can also make, probably the cutest, Darth Vader and Chewie noises. Her favorite is to do them when we are walking. We then proceed to run away from whoever she is making the noise of. We get some odd looks running down the street yelling Darth Vader. Oh no, but who cares? My little one has no hope of not being a geek like her parents, and we couldn't be more proud. Buy her a T16 as soon as you can. I caught my 6-year-old daughter sneaking handfuls of green beans after dinner the other day, with a full bag of candy right next to the fridge, completely ignored. I'm proud, but it just feels so wrong. My 6-year-old daughter cries hysterically whenever she watches the Doctor Who episode where David Tennant regenerates. Even when we watch the new episodes, she still asks where her doctor is. I introduced my younger siblings to Doctor Who and they loved it. My sister, 4 years old at the time, 6 now, said that when she grew up she wanted to be a doctor. I just smiled and thought that she was being ambitious at such a young age when she proceeded to tell me so she could die and become other people and have a screwdriver. D. Daughter, 3, 1-2 years old. The tooth fairy came last night. Wife, oh really? Daughter, yeah, she was really big. Wife, oh yeah. Daughter, yeah, but it is okay, I killed her. She is dead. She won't hurt anyone again. Last night my 4-year-old son asked if he could play on the computer after dinner, and I said yes. He responded, okay, so after dinner, I'm gonna play on the computer, deal? Then he shook my hand and said, a gentleman's agreement. My husband said he taught it to him, but I've never actually witnessed it until last night. Huzzah. My 6-year-old son made up a video game, in his head, about his baby brother called Egyptian Aaron, where Aaron wears a golden onsie and the headdress of the Sphinx and has adventures in the Valley of the Kings. If it's in 2-player mode, you can choose to play as one of their baby cousins. I can't even begin to type out how detailed it is. He even has sequels made up to the game. He's been making up the game since his brother was born. He also loves Star Wars and other cool stuff, but I think Egyptian Aaron is the best his overactive imagination has to offer. I wrote it all down, so he will be able to see it when he grows up and knows how much he always loved his little brother. Dude, my name is Aaron, and I have an older brother, but he never made a video game about me, that son of a b. So to ruin all the fun, I am going to tell a tearjerker. My brother passed away a year ago. My mom was laying in his bed just crying. My 3-year-old niece sees that, walks upstairs. She brings back a stuffed animal, gives it to my mom while rubbing her back. She says this, insert brother's name here, is gone now and he is not coming back. But I am here for you. Just telling that story is putting me to tears. My girlfriend's kid calls Star Wars Tar W. One time while playing he loudly declared, "I want octopus water, to heck with your drinks." Next time I'm out and about I think I may need to say that. The time my 6-year-old cousin called me almost too excited to speak and started relaying to me for 20 minutes a detailed description of how he had beat the final level of Super Mario Bros., which both of us had been stuck on for some time. What made it better was my aunt getting on the phone explaining to me how he had told them first, but none of them had apparently understood how mind-blowingly awesome the accomplishment was. He then apparently sighed in exasperation and had asked for them to call me up. Sigh, I love that kid. I don't know about proud, but it was absolutely hilarious. I just had a baby a week ago, C-section, and was in the bathroom looking at my belly in the mirror. My 5-year-old son walked in and with a very serious, very pained voice said, "Your body is so old. Maybe you had to be there." It's funny how kids are the biggest jerks in the world and parents love them for it. About a month ago I went into the lounge to see my 3-year-old daughter doing a kind of weird, slow dance. I asked her what she was doing, and her reply was a matter-of-fact waterbending. Almost made me tearbend. I was so proud. See if kids Tai Chi exists. Sign her up ASAP. I'm a single dad who only gets to see my son every other weekend. He just turned 2. The last time I had him, he was being very terrible to us all weekend. He is talking, but you could only understand a few words unless you're around him a good deal and know what certain sounds mean, like I, his mom, and her family are. On Sundays, he knows the routine, so when he sees me start to pack things up to take him back to his mom, he follows me around closely, occasionally parting from me to pick up a toy he wants for the drive. This last time he was waiting by the garage door, and I had been getting on to him about continually trying to mess with some electrical wires, lamps. When he was waiting by the garage door, I noticed his hair was messy, so I grabbed his comb out of his weekend bag and called him over. He came and lowered his head. I combed it, parted it, and put it into place. He hugged me and said, clearly, "Thank you, Daddy." I don't know about it making me particularly proud by definition, but it almost made me break into tears. That moment has been permanently burned into my brain, and I remember it, and smile, often. My son, 4 at the time, looked me square in the eye during dinner and said, "I'm not worried about zombies, Mom. I'll just dig out their eyes with my fork." Not my child, but my little sister, at age 2, was with my family at Christmas. All I Want for Christmas Is You by Mariah Carey started playing. She immediately stopped playing with her toys, tilted her head sideways quizzically, then said, "This isn't good music." My 4-year-old daughter was asked what she would like to be when she grew up. A doctor, but not the kind that stops you feeling poorly, the kind that stops you feeling sad. She also role-played as a 50-year-old homeless woman called Nellie for about 4 hours. Fully in character with detailed backstory and everything. Baffling. Not sure what impressed me the most. Time to get her started playing tabletop RPGs, methinks. My 4-year-old son and I were playing Knights when he grabbed a stick and slammed it into the ground yelling, "You shall not pass." My 6-year-old son has been trying really hard to make jokes lately. Most of them have been about what you'd expect from a 6-year-old. Lots of homonym jokes, but we're very happy that he is building his language skills. The other day, a cookie that I was eating went down the wrong pipe and I started coughing. My son walked into the room and, without missing a beat, says, "I guess that's why they call those Biscoff cookies." I feel like I should get this. My middle daughter's 1st grade teacher sent a note home asking why she was wearing her dark blue hoodie and running around the playground yelling Azarithmetrians Inthus while wiggling fingers at people. My 7-year got into Futurama about 2 years ago. She came to see me at work when I did mall security. She saw me on a balcony looking down at her, her little voice ringing out. Do a flip brightened my day. As an onlooker, that would be the weirdest crap. I was sitting on the couch with my, at the time 7 years old, son watching TV one day. He got up and grabbed a Sunny Delight out of the fridge and walked back into the living room. He took a huge swig, looked at me and said with a straight face, "I don't always drink orange drink, but when I do it's Sunny Delight." He does funny random stuff like this all the time. The other day, my 3.5-year-old daughter was hanging out with my wife. My daughter said, "I love you so much. I want to keep you forever, but I can't because you're gonna die, but not yet," and then she gave my wife a big hug. I wish I could come to such good terms with the impending death of my own parents. That's one of my biggest fears. When I went into labor with my second child, it all happened very fast and my other half wasn't home from work yet. My 2-year-old son was amazing. Went and packed his suitcase to stay at Nana's and rubbed my back when I couldn't move. He was so grown up and sensible. I was so proud of him. That is pretty dang impressive. Not my son but my nephew actually. During the terrible floods in Pakistan, his school put a donation box out for anything people could spare in the way of relief for the Pakistani people. My nephew was about 6 at the time. When he was home one night, he drew and colored a $100 bill and asked his mom if she wanted to trade for a real $5 bill. She thought it was hilarious and cute, so she gave him the $5 in exchange for the drawing. The next day, his teacher told us that he took $5 and dropped it in the donation box for Pakistan. Never been prouder in my life. He deserves a medal. Keep doing whatever you are doing with that lad. My 4-year-old son was playing with his sister when he went over to her and farted. She yelled that he was gross and farted on her, and he looked at me with a smarter smile and said that wasn't just a fart. I was doing butt karate. This probably shouldn't have made me feel proud, but it did. If this is butt karate, then I must be a black belt. Our 6-year-old, at the time, daughter knew what the word shrubbery meant on a test to get into a gifted program because she had seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail. We skipped the spank me scene. That's what my parents did, and it wasn't till I was a senior in high school and watching the movie with my BF at the time that I realized that scene existed. It blew my mind that my parents had hid its existence that well, and then I was paranoid and tried to figure out what other movie scenes they'd hidden from me. Cruising in the car when my son was about 6. "Son, who's playing this song?" "Me." "That's Carlos Santana." "Son, when I grow up, I'm going to play guitar like him." "Me." "That'll be awesome. I'll be your road manager. I was in the business. You'll need to start working now to be that good." "Son, well, if I can't play like him, then I'd like to play like Eric Clapton." "Me." Speechless. He's now a biochemistry major. He does play the guitar. Don't have a kid, but a family friend's 4-year-old came up to me and said, "Jesus is pretty cool." I wasn't really sure what to say to that, so I just said, "Yeah, why do you think that?" He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Jesus came back from the grave, which makes him a zombie. Zombies are awesome." Laughed so hard. To quote Professor Farnsworth, "Sweet zombie Jesus." My 4-year-old has never said anything that specific, but I'm always listening in on him when he's playing with his action figures, and in his play universe, he is always defending me against the bad guys. It melts my heart every time I hear, "That's my mommy and you can't take her away." When my middle son, he was 8, tells his friend very loudly while sitting in church with my ex-husband, "Well, my mom's priest can kick the crap out of our priest." She PvPs. I got a phone call right after it ended. When my daughter was 4, we had to go to my other daughter's end of year school performance, but the shorts and shirt she chose weren't to her mother's liking. She was told go to pick some new clothes, and after some drama upstairs, she came down in new clothes but wearing the shorts on her head. She said as a compromise, "I'm going to wear them as a hat." My mom's jaw dropped. My wife and I burst out laughing. She then put her stuffed monkey toy into the shorts and went out the door. We let her wear it, but when we arrived at the preschool she decided to take it off. We were really proud of her ingenuity. In response to the question, where would you most like to visit for a middle school get to know you activity, my 12-year-old daughter responded Middle Earth. The kid also loves Weird Al, Star Wars, and D&D. My daughter is 4 and asks to go to Stark Tower. Every time I tell her I can't take her there, she says, "No, you just won't." It actually breaks my heart. Yesterday when picking up my 5-year-old son from kindergarten, he told me, "Dad, when I grow up, I'm gonna be a cop." Then my 4-year-old son replied, "Dad, when I grow up, I'm gonna be dangerous." My oldest son was born in 1992. The following took place when he was approximately 3 or 4 years old. I had been watching MTV, I think Road Rules or Real World, and had simply left the TV on that channel. I'd gone over to my computer and fired up my new 56k modem and signed into Prodigy, yeah, kicking it old school, and was messing around on the Usenet and chat rooms. A while later my son wandered over and said, "Dad, let's play Beavis and Butthead." Before I could even reply he said, in the best Butthead impersonation a 4-year-old could muster, "Shut up, dumbass." I quickly got up and changed the channel while trying not to completely crack up and encourage him to repeat said phrase to strangers for laughs. Few years back, my son was about 6. Me and his dad were play fighting, but to him it looked like a real fight. He went up to his dad, pushed him with all his strength and shouted, "Don't you dare hit my mom. Don't you dare, I have my own bodyguard. Don't let him practice the discus." My 4-year-old thinks Reddit is the news and knows the Reddit alien is named Snow. Also yesterday, I heard her singing mumbling "Smells Like Teen Spirit" while playing a game on her DS. She also says she wants to grow up to be a penguin expert, a scientist, make video games, and be an artist, and she likes math. She also once explained, roughly, how a combustion engine works to a friend of mine. "Your 4-year-old is smarter than me, crap." A friend of mine was playing with his 4-year-old daughter when she said, "Okay daddy, you'll be the handsome prince, and I'll be the adorable little hermaphrodite." I totally lost me shite. The first time my little brother tried imitating Darth Vader's breathing, I have never been prouder of a 4-year-old. When my daughter was around 3 years old, we would play a lot of Pantera in the car. One day while the song Walk was on, she just blurted out "No way punk" the same time that Phil did. At the end of the song she also said "Walk on homeboy." Freaking adorable. Another time when she was about 1, my wife and I were watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Our daughter was laying on the floor about ready to pass out. When the theme song started, she stood straight up and started dancing. My 3-year-old daughter went through an obsession with Spider-Man for about 3 months, so naturally she was running around shooting imaginary webs at bad guys. It was adorable. I hope she's nerdy when she grows up. The Princess Bride was on TV the other day. My 6-year-old watched part of it with my husband. I heard him playing with his toys the next day or so and he said, "And you can die too, for all I care," was not followed by "as you wish." If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.